Good afternoon, everyone. Do sit down. Can I start by the usual reminder about mobile phones and anything else that might interfere with the sound system, please, switching them off. And the first announcement after that is that tea is likely to be round about 7 o'clock rather than 6:30, because we have an amount of business we need to get through before we break for tea. Next, we'll move on to the scheme of things. I hope everybody's got the right papers, or some way or other, electronically or otherwise, in front of them. Yes? Good. Apologies for absence. Jennifer.
I have apologies for absence from Councillors Anwar, Curran, Fry, Malik, Sim and Councillor Humberston will be late. That's all I have at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any other apologies for absence anyone knows of? I would like to suggest that we might want to send good wishes to Councillor Sim, because she's been having a pretty rough time, one illness after another, and is still not able to be back with us. So would Council agree that we send her our best wishes? Thank you. Hope to see her back soon. Any declarations of interest? Yes.
Item 9.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any other interest they should declare? Right. Thank you. Then announcements. I don't have any today. Councillor Brown, do you have any announcements? Thank you. Chief Executive? No. Chief Finance Officer, who seems to have vanished. Therefore, he certainly can't. Right. And the Monitoring Officer? Thank you. Then we need to agree the procedure for debate, which you have in front of you, which is what was used last year, and I think mostly the year before. Everyone happy with it? Good. Right, let's move into it then. We then have public addresses. Barbara Witowski from the Oxfordshire Badger Group, I think, will take her first. She has 5 minutes to speak to us. And either Councillor Hollingsworth or Councillor Turner will please give a response. Thank you.
Good evening.
You know you have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Witkowski and I am the Records Officer for Oxfordshire Badger Group, which promotes the conservation, welfare and understanding of badgers. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. The Protection of Badgers Act 1992 protects badgers and their homes, sets, in law, but they remain under threat from road traffic, the government-sanctioned cull in our neighbouring county, and habitat loss through development. It is of grave concern that developments such as the Seacourt Park and Ride extension, agreed by Oxford City Council, could lead to the loss of badgers from our city. We are opposed to the extension of Seacourt Park and Ride into the adjacent floodplain fields, as it will destroy a locally important, abundant wildlife habitat, which has remained largely untouched since early last century. It should be protected as a habitat of principal importance under the City Council's own biodiversity plan. It is in the interest of Oxford City's residents and visitors that the Council adopts effective environmental policies and processes and funds the resourcing of a full assessment of the city's wildlife before it vanishes forever. It was extremely discouraging to hear one Labour councillor at the West Oxford Planning Review meeting dismiss this land at Seacourt Park and Ride as only 5 acres of green belt which no one except the houses that back onto it ever sees. In fact, this land provides a mosaic of habitats used by a wide range of resident and transient species, from butterflies and pollinating insects, nesting songbirds, to bats and terrestrial mammals, including deer and badgers. This development will have a severe impact on the badgers, their sets and foraging ground, and no mitigation will compensate for what will be lost. The Badger Group has been monitoring the badgers at Seacourt for over 30 years. Contrary to the contracted ecologist's opinion that the area is suboptimal for badgers, it is one of the few semi-wild places that remains safe for them to live amidst the creeping development that has been approved around Botley Road on floodplain. Badgers have learned to live with the frequent flooding, but they won't survive drilling, piling or aggregate materials pouring onto their sets and the fields where they forage. Building over this greenbelt floodplain that flanks Botley Road is not the best or only solution to Oxford's traffic and parking issues and sets a destructive precedent. Like many local residents, we do not have confidence in either the council's experts nor the Environment Agency's lack of modelling of what the impact of the park and ride expansion and the proposed flood alleviation scheme earthworks will have on groundwater flooding in this location. How can the City Council justify spending millions of pounds on a scheme that will destroy precious floodplain in the Greenbelt, when in my view the data behind their decision is at best scant and skewed to favour growth at any costs? Making Oxford a world-class city for everyone else comes at a cost to local residents, our green spaces and precious wildlife. This is too high a price to pay and will be a terrible legacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, who is going to make a response? Councillor Turner or Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. I mean, I think what we've heard is a cogent presentation of some points which have been made at the Planning Committee. To me, they sound more like issues for a Planning Committee rather than a budget debate, but this is clearly an issue which will feature in our budget debate subsequently, and I'm sure councillors will bear in mind what's been said.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is not able to come, but we do have the text in the briefing note, and therefore people can have read it or can read it now, and it would be good to have a response from, I think, Councillor Hollingsworth on the car park charges proposed for Headington.
Yes, it's clearly going to be a subject of debate in today's discussions. All I would say is that the purpose of a consultation budget is to consult. The consultation response came back, and as a result, the CEB changed its budgetary proposals. So I think that's an example of consultation working.
Thank you. Right, we now have the report of the Independent Remuneration Panel. Councillor Brown.
Lord Mayor, before Susan starts on this, I understand it is a subject of interesting legal debate whether any member with a position which is affected by particular provisions in this needs to declare a pecuniary interest or not. In any event, my thought was, regardless of the legal position, I would like to withdraw for this item and have it noted. And given the uncertainty around legal advice, then I declare a pecuniary interest just in case one does obtain. But equally, if others reach a different view on future agenda items like this, then that's up to them. But I'm off.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Right. But see you later, right?
I sincerely hope that Councillor Turner will be back. I'd like to move this report, and in moving it, I'd like to thank very much the Independent Remuneration Panel for the work that they have done on this, which is, as always, extremely helpful and thoughtful. And in moving the report, I would like to say to Council that I think it's a really important thing that we have an Independent Remuneration Panel, and that my view is that we should not seek to amend, as I know the opposition are about to seek to do, the recommendations of an Independent Remuneration Panel, because I think it doesn't help the way in which this council is viewed if we start tinkering around with the recommendations of an independent panel. We set up an independent panel because it is good to have an independent group of people looking at our allowances, deciding on balance what they think is a fair way of rewarding people for the work that they put in, for balancing out the needs of different members, and who have looked at the whole work that this council does in terms of the needs for the future and have come to conclusions which they have put before us. So I thank them for their work and I commend the report to council.
Thank you. You have a seconder? Right. Who would like to comment on this? It's an open debate. Councillor Gant.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to address recommendation 1 separately from the other recommendations, with your permission, Lord Mayor. Basically, we are delighted to accept recommendations 2 to 6 and join the leader in thanking the panel for its work on those important items. We don't, as the leader has already informed council, support recommendation 1. So just to deal first of all with the question of this council questioning an independent review, I think my response to that is, well, up to a point. The review panel was looking at a proposal that was sent to it by council. It then sends the proposal back to council. If we were simply obliged to accept all the recommendations, then there wouldn't be any point in us being here now. Lord Mayor, this is public money. It's up to us to decide whether the expense is justified. It's up to us to justify to our voters what we are spending it on. I do not believe that spending public money on a second non-statutory deputy leader for the council is justified. And I'd perhaps just briefly refer council to some of the justifications that were put forward when the idea was first proposed. Firstly, it was to achieve gender balance in the leadership. Well, I was very clear at the time that that's an internal matter for the party group. Frankly, you can elect whoever you want to your existing leadership posts and achieve whatever balance you wish through that process. The second point is that there are greater demands, particularly around partnership working. Well, the panel makes reference to those in its report, but there's no specific extra duties that have been added to this post. Now, all executive board members represent the board and the council on various partnership bodies. Indeed, so do most other councillors. It's taken as part of the job and is paid accordingly. It does seem to me that, you know, a job needs a job description. If we're going to pay this person to do something, we need to know what it is we're paying them to do. The other justification we were given at the time was the idea of succession planning, which was an interesting point at the end of last year, but I'm interested to know that the leader is still interested in succession planning, having been in the job for just a few weeks. But this is public money, Lord Mayor. There isn't a justification. The balance of leader and deputy leader is well established. People understand it. Other councils use it perfectly well. It is not appropriate for us to be spending public money on an extra post without sufficiently defined duties.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? Councillor Simmons.
Well, I think we would agree with what Andrew said. The microphone's going again, isn't it? I think this is a plot. So just to make many of the same points that Andrew did, and just one additional one. I mean, if you look at the terms of reference of the panel, they are drawn quite tightly around some of the questions that understandably the administration, this council, wanted answering. And if you'd said to them, you know, in line with its principles that no councillor should suffer economic loss from being a councillor, I would think most of us probably do suffer economic loss from being a councillor. And so I think to single out one person, which essentially is what's being done, to justify that. Now, I don't think it's, maybe my argument slightly different to Andrew's. It's not so much that people here, sitting here, don't deserve more. I mean, most of us are working at below the living wage doing council work. And I don't think that's particularly acceptable. But to single out certain people to get better treatment is, I think, our primary objection.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Price.
Well, thank you, Lord Mayor. I think
of course, it is public money, and it's also a matter of public record that the allowances paid to members of this council are extremely low compared with many other councils, particularly given the scale of activity and work that we undertake. And one of the purposes of this is not to mitigate the entire economic loss that might occur, because, as Craig says, that would be very difficult to do in many cases, but to mitigate it to a degree which makes it marginally more acceptable. And I can say, from 10 years' experience, that the level of work that falls upon the leadership group, putting it in the generalised terms, is massively greater than it was 10 years ago. And it's partnership working, it's the level of internal liaison with officers and with the various agencies and stakeholders with which we have contact, particularly in the economic development sphere, but also in the police, health and other public services. So the scale of this is enormous, and the purpose of this role is to provide the level of involvement that is appropriate for the council to maintain its business, but also to remunerate the second deputy leader in a way which actually he or she doesn't lose too much from their other functions. So it is directly related to a job description, which is on paragraph 21. It's not in the detail which you get in the job description written for an employment position, because it's inevitably going to be determined by the circumstances of the particular period and the particular issues coming before the council. But it is a clear job description. It's clearly related to the volume of work that's required, and it's clearly related to a overall very low level of remuneration for members of this council for the work that they do.
Any more speakers? No. Councillor Gant, you can't quite sum up on this one, can you? You merely objected. Right, okay, let's get this straight. There's a suggestion that it might be sensible, indeed, if we vote separately on point 1 and on the others where there doesn't seem to be any dissent. Does that make sense? You're going to say something, Councillor Brown? Please do.
Well, I thought it was for me to sum up. Was it?
Absolutely, go on. Sorry, I've got confused already. It's early in the evening. Keep going.
I would just like to pick up on some of the points that were made in the debate. I do think that it's important when we are making these sorts of decisions that we are viewing it as in principle decisions, and that is one of the reasons why we have got a plan to have, we now have 2 deputy leaders of the council. That is a better way forward in terms of being able to delegate responsibilities. You've heard from Councillor Price in terms of the responsibilities of partnership work, which have indeed increased exponentially, and as you all be aware from the meeting last week that we had in this council, are only going to increase in the future. I think it is also important to always consider succession planning, and I think you do that from the moment that you step into office. So I also think that for the future it is important that we have people who are participating in all of those partnership arrangements and are able to do so in future. I also don't want us to lose sight of the excellent proposals in the rest of the report, which I know do have common support across the council chamber.
Thank you. Right. Can we vote first then on point 1 about the payment of a special responsibility allowance for the non-statutory deputy leader post? Those in favour of that recommendation, please show. And those against? Now, which is indeed 1 to 6, including thanking the remuneration panel, as we should. Well, I did say 1 to 6 quite deliberately, because 1 has now been agreed. All right, well, I thought now we're going to have a package vote. Okay? Everybody happy with that? Yeah, thank you.
My point of order. May I suggest we vote on 2 to 6?
We have indeed voted on 1. All right, if everyone's happy, we will simply, having dismissed point 1 objections, therefore that is taken as approved. We then will approve separately 2 to 6 to make sure we've got it all tidied up. All right? Thank you. Right, those in favour of 2 to 6 then? Now, the report of a Section 151 officer, Nigel Kennedy, on the robustness of the budget. There is also an issue of the said officer's commentary on the opposition budgets, which somehow didn't get printed, and we have a large pile of paper. Could that perhaps be circulated and people be given a little time at this stage? I'll give you about 3 minutes to have a look through that. Thank you very much. Jennifer would like to say a few words.
apart from to apologise for missing Nigel's commentary on the opposition budgets out of your pack papers when it actually printed, you should all have sight of two pieces of paper now, one commentary on the Lib Dem amendments and one commentary on the Green amendments. Two single sheets of paper, one in each opposition amendment.
Everybody well equipped? Yes? Right, take it as read. No, not quite, it seems. Can we move on then? Everyone had... Do you want another minute to read them? Oh, Nigel is commendably brief. It doesn't follow as read though. Right. Mr. Sadler, are you happy? Well, we need to move on. Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, please, I'd like to present your report.
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. Just to give you a brief overview of the report that you have before you. So this is the Norman annual report that I produce as the Council Section 151 officer on the robustness of the estimates for the next 4 financial years and also the adequacy of reserves and balances. And it's something which as Council you should consider alongside the budget that you have presented before you tonight. So in terms of the robustness of budgets, so this is the culmination of significant work by heads of service, corporate management team, CEB, and obviously the Council's finance panel as well, to look at the budgets that have been put together and say that forms the papers that you've got before you tonight. In terms of the adequacy of reserves and balances, so reserves and balances are split into earmarked reserves, i.e. they are to cover expected future payments for specific expenditure. And secondly, in terms of working balances, which basically provide a protection for the revenue account against unexpected eventualities, losses of income, increased cost, etc. And I suppose given the uncertainty going forward, especially around things like business rates, the loss of revenue support grant from the 1st of April 2019, the risk to council budgets generally going forward are increased, and certainly our fees and charges form about 55% of our total income now. So there is a need to keep such balances in reserves as laid out in the report. In terms specifically around the earmarked reserves, so they've moved from around 62 million to I expect around about the 50 million pound mark by the end of this financial year. And one of the major elements of the earmarked reserves is around the capital funding reserve, which forms about 50% of the total amount of earmarked reserves to fund what is a significant capital programme going forward of well over £100 million. In terms of the balances, the working balance I mentioned, so both for the housing revenue account and for the general fund, this is around £4 million, and this is to cover unexpected eventualities. I think it's important to note there isn't any scientific judgment or scientific calculation in terms of the levels that should be held. It is a judgment call based on the activities of the council and an assessment of the risks of the budget, say, of the next 4-year period. Indeed, sort of work undertaken by the previous audit commission would have a range of these basically within councils from 0% of the net revenue general fund expenditure to about 226%. And so their council 17% basically is well within those boundaries basically. So I think in conclusion, I am satisfied with the robustness of the budget estimates that have been put before you for both the coming year's budget and the following 3 financial years to give you an overall balanced budget position for that 4-year period. And I am also satisfied with the adequacy of the level of reserves and balances to be able to both sustain the capital and revenue programmes and to provide an adequate protection for the revenue account given the level of known risk at this point in time. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Right. In which case... we need to move on to the scrutiny response, which I believe Councillor Simmons is going to sum up for us. Thank you.
I'm hampered by technology, Chair. Let me just switch to my book. So, thank you very much to Nigel for the officer's report, and indeed, as he said, it was very much a joint effort from senior officers and finance panel, and indeed many members. And I'd like to pay tribute to James Fry, who is not here, and I'm presenting in his place. But as chair of finance panel, I think he did an excellent job at bringing together very many disparate views, very many different points that we had to address. And we had a series of 4 evidence sessions spread around January where we took service by service, line by line almost, all the new bids and looked at the base budget as well. And we came to the conclusion, I think Nigel's alluded to it, is that we really needed to focus on 2 things, which was sort of maximising income and indeed sort of consolidating income and looking towards meeting future challenges. And Nigel mentioned 2 of them, the fair funding review for affecting business rates and Brexit. And indeed, perhaps he hasn't sort of gone as far as saying the fact that with revenue support grant going to 0 in 2019, that's quite a historic change in our finances as a council. So it means we are funded by fees and charges, council tax and business rates. And so we are increasingly tied into the economy of Oxford, because if businesses fail, shops close down, then our own income goes down, and we're far more disproportionately affected by that than we ever were in the past. So things such as Brexit, although they might sometimes seem distant, if there is an economic effect on Oxford, we will feel it directly through the revenues we have to spend. The finance panel made 15 recommendations to CEB. All but a couple were accepted in full, and a couple were accepted in part. I don't intend to go through those unless anyone has any particular questions. I'll just pick up on maybe a couple that weren't accepted in full. We recommended that there was additional resource for city centre management to help with the establishment of a business improvement district, and I understand there's alternative proposals for that, so that wasn't accepted. And something which around annual garden waste collection fees are being incrementally increased, and we recommended their increase in a single step because it would generate additional revenue, and it seemed an increase from £45 to £52 wasn't substantial enough to cause too much problems, given that people on benefits get the service for free anyway. So that's really all I want to say, but I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have.
Thank you. Any questions for Councillor Simmons? No? Right, in which case we note the report. Thank you, Council. Move on to the Licensing and Gambling Acts and General Purposes Licensing Committee recommendations on fees and charges. Councillor Cook.
I so move the report. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Council, you will have noticed, is recommended to agree the charges set out in 9A, B and C, and the corrections to the budget published at 10D relating to sex establishments on the grounds that this is a review ongoing and it is therefore premature to make any changes to the proposals. Sorry? Councillor Clarkson is somewhere hiding. Right. Councillor Clarkson, would you like to say anything?
We need to go back and review them. We were proposing to make recommendations tonight, and they have been to the General Purposes Licensing Committee, but we have had to withdraw them, and we'll be reviewing them and coming back shortly. Okay.
Thank you. So we will, as the recommendation says, delegate the setting to the head of law and governance and the head of financial services on conclusion of the review of the chart. Thank you very much. Anyone, any questions, comments on these on the new fees and charges, apart from on those? Nope. Right. In that case, we agree them. Anyone unhappy? No? Good. Thank you. Right, we can get on to item 10, it's the budget. And you will have noticed we have to have a recorded vote. I'll come to that at the end. But to start off with, we have a proposal from Councillor Turner presenting the budget for the next 4 years.
Thanks very much indeed, Lord Mayor and fellow councillors. It is a great pleasure for me to stand here and propose for the Council's Labour Administration our budget. This will actually be my 10th time of doing so. Thank you, goodness. It feels like the end of an era, however, because Bob, for the first time, is, in those 10 years, no longer leader. But Bob, where is he? There he is. Bob, you played a huge role in setting the stage for this budget. Many councils would have gone down the road, and indeed have gone down the road, of saying government funding is reducing, we need to trim frontline services as far as we have to, we need to look at outsourcing areas of our provisions to private sector. Bob, we know you wouldn't have let me or let our council officers get away with such lazy thinking, and the positive starting point we have today owes a great deal to your leadership. Thank you very much. Needless to say, I'm thrilled to be supporting Susan. Our shared political journey itself is over 20 years long, believe it or not, and goes back to the days before Tony Blair became Prime Minister, when I still had a big gold earring and a god-awful haircut. I know, Susan, you won't be any less demanding. As always, I want to put on record our thanks to council officers, Nigel and the finance team, Jackie, who's soon going to leave to get Reading's finances shipshape as well, best of luck there, and also the whole organisation. Every year we can think that nothing more can come out of the bushes towards us, and every year the government seems determined to spring a few surprises. This year, on the one hand, it's been financial notifications arriving just weeks, and in some cases days, before the start of the budget setting process, and on the other hand, hundreds of pointless notifications arriving in relation to the implementation of universal credit. The relevant minister, in touch as ever, has said he didn't think these would be a burden for local authorities. Well, of course, Lord Mayor, they do pose a burden, but our council is determined to get on top of the mess ministers have created, not just to ensure the effective functioning of our organisation, but also to prevent more damage being done to vulnerable people in Oxford by a government that just doesn't care. Of course, in this budget, there are some hard decisions. Nobody likes putting up fees and charges, and while our council tax increase is lower than that of other public authorities, the County Council and Thames Valley Police, we understand it all represents money that has to be paid. At the same time, we're one of just a handful of councils which preserves, in full, council tax support for those on lower incomes, something we're proud to do. We've also decided to increase city centre and suburban car park charges. Of course, we understand representation saying we shouldn't do this, but essentially we're in a position where either we need to raise these charges, or we need to hike up other fees and charges, notably those of the park and ride car parks, or we need to cut other services. We've chosen to freeze the basic park and ride charge for two reasons. First, we want to encourage those coming to Oxford by car to leave their cars at the park and ride, rather than drive into the city centre, creating further pollution. And secondly, we want our tariffs to be aligned with the County Council's park and ride car parks, so we don't have extra miles being driven, extra pollution being produced, in order to get to a cheaper car park. And for us, cutting services at the front line would be an absolute last resort. It's worth reminding ourselves just how much local government finance has shifted. Notably, Revenue Support Grant, once one of our largest funding streams, is simply ending after next year. Nil, nada. The government is opting out of the funding of local public services. This ideological assault began in 2010, brought to us by David Cameron and Nick Clegg, George Osborne and Delhi Alexander, remember that lot, and it's been hacking shreds out of services in our city ever since. For many of us, it's personal. We know the impact that mental health service cuts, 8% a year under the coalition, have had. My son goes to a school that was promised a new building until Osborne and Alexander cut the primary school capital budget. We see the daily consequences of the shameful decision of that government to uncouple housing benefit from what rents actually cost, sending a clear message to those on lower incomes that they have no place in areas like Oxford with higher housing costs. This continues to have a disastrous impact. Yet the answer in our Labour group is twofold. First, what can we do to make a difference, to mitigate the worst excesses of atrocious central government choices, and need to take positive decisions to shape our city to the good? And secondly, we will keep putting the arguments for progressive politics, for a kinder, more decent agenda at a national level, and we will not cease until that agenda is pursued in Downing Street once again. Along that theme, make a difference, this budget of course pushes the button on the transfer of a number of our services to our wholly owned local authority trading company. In recent years, our external trading from direct services has gone from strength to strength. We're now valued by numerous other organisations as a reliable, effective partner and in a position to take our trading activity to the next level. By way of reminder, this budget foresees £500,000 extra per year coming in once the company is fully established and punching its weight in the marketplace. Compare this to the Carillion fiasco in delivery of public services. Our company pays the Oxford Living Wage. Our company will combine the best of public service values, led by experienced public servants, with a desire to push the boundaries of what is possible in serving other organisations too, bringing in extra income that we can plough directly back into the front line. It's in the spirit of what some would call innovation, others might whisper it, use the term municipal socialism, which is what I refer to when I say we will take positive decisions to shape our city to the good. While I mentioned the Oxford Living Wage, Lord Mayor, I want just to highlight how popular this was in our budget consultation. Our determination to pay our own staff, but also our contractors, an amount of money on which they can actually afford to live. Of course, it was also a project close to the heart of Van Coulter, one of the two great comrades we lost over the last year. So today we propose to go further with a dedicated pot of funding to promote the Oxford Living Wage, not only to those who are engaged in direct dealings with our council, but more widely across our city as well. There are organisations who could afford to pay all their staff decently, yet too many reward their management decently, but provide poverty pay to others. For years, we in this council have led by example, by encouragement. Our new campaigning efforts will say, time is up for poverty pay in Oxford. Lord Mayor, there's no greater pressure in Oxford than the challenges caused in so many different ways by the shortage of housing. I defy anyone to have a conversation with a fellow citizen about what it's like to live in Oxford and not stumble on this issue within the first few sentences. As councillors, we feel this hard, being approached for help by families in increasingly desperate situations, looking at awful properties where those vulnerable to exploitation are being ripped off. And of course, there's no greater scar on Oxford at present than the atrocious rise in rough sleeping to record levels. My colleague, Councillor Henwood, wrote movingly of his own experiences just this week. David, that would have been a hard piece for you to write, and we're grateful to you for doing so. This rise is part of a national tragedy. Rough sleeping is up by 169% since 2010. The reasons for this are forensically dissected by the National Audit Office. We recognise them all too clearly here in Oxford. Cuts in housing benefits, reductions in hospital funding, underfunding of preventative services, and increasing numbers of people who are not entitled to any public support. This can, should, and must be addressed. Let's not forget that the Labour government under Tony Blair reduced the rough sleeping by around 3/4. We note the government's stated commitments to end rough sleeping, though those of us who remember the early days of the coalition government and its promises will be rather sceptical. The truth is that the Tory Lib Dem coalition was in its comfort zone talking about joining up services, but modest one-off initiatives could do nothing against the avalanche of housing benefit cuts, in particular chucking people out on the street. Here, in this budget as a council, we go further. We propose increasing the revenue budget by £200,000 a year from 2019-20, plus £280,000 extra towards reserve funding on homelessness, plus a £5 million programme of property purchases, plus earmarking all of the government funding for homelessness reduction for that specific purpose, plus £10 million of investment in council housing as part of the renewal of East Oxford Community Centre, plus £74 million in loans to our new local housing company to support housing developments in Oxford, with a specific focus on affordable housing for local people, not to mention our part in winning £60 million for affordable housing as part of the Oxfordshire Growth Deal. At the same time, we're clear that the task of tackling homelessness is something that is shared around our city, and we see a vital role for the range of voluntary sector organisations who do so much. For instance, those churches who've been opening their doors to people in cold weather, but also other public sector and not-for-profit organisations. For me, Lord Mayor, the success of the County Labour Group in persuading Oxfordshire's Tories not to axe all hostile funding was a very significant moment. The County Council will soon get responsibility for funding all homeless services currently in receipt of supported accommodation housing benefit. At last, the penny seems to have dropped that they cannot simply repeat, it's a district council problem, not something for us, and they have a responsibility to work with us. It was our council that said to other organisations, let's not walk away from the homeless pathway that's so desperately needed. By the skin of our teeth, we managed to salvage something from the wreckage of government and county council cuts. Our new message is, we're determined to end rough sleeping. Colleagues and friends, whoever you are, wherever you come from, come and be part of our city conversation. Give of your time, your energy and your expertise. Together we can end rough sleeping in Oxford. Government and other public organisations will be held to account for their commitments and their actions. Local organisations will know that in Oxford City Council, they have a partner that is totally committed to pulling its weight in this battle. Of course, this is also part of the wider pattern of support for public grant-funded activity in Oxford. We're maintaining in full our funding for the advice sector locally, something I know that Jennifer Pegg, the other great comrade we lost so suddenly last year, cared about greatly. For us, building a world-class city for everyone is not just a strapline for council brochures. It reflects our ambition to ensure that the best of Oxford is something not to be shared only amongst the richest few. So not only are we maintaining advice funding, we're also extending support for cultural organisations that reach out among the city's people, and we'll ensure with match funding in this budget for the Museum of Oxford that all can take pride in our city and what it stands for. Our city centre has, in the last year, entered a new era with the opening of the new Westgate shopping centre. Broadly, we can be pleased with this development. Not only has it increased footfall in the city centre and provided hundreds of jobs, but it will also unlock several £1 million in funding for genuinely affordable housing. At the same time, we can't be complacent about other parts of our city centre. This budget therefore includes £1.6 million to be spent upon the fabric of the covered market. Additionally, and in response to scrutiny, we're going to analyse whether any extra work to support city centre development is needed, and if so, it will have a high priority in considering how to use any underspend at the end of this financial year. There are, of course, other important changes in this budget too, reflecting the conversations we have with our citizens all year round. For instance, our proposal to provide a pavilion facility at 5 Mile Drive, or the investment in fighting crime in areas most affected by policing cuts. Our capital programme, weighing in at over £245 million, must be amongst the most ambitious of any district council in the country. But we should also be deeply proud of the way in which our values affect what we have now come to regard as business as usual. How many councils of any political colour are proposing budgets right now without frontline service cuts? How many are expanding support for community organisations? How many are able to commit literally hundreds of millions of pounds to solve the housing crisis? How many are making a commitment to those on the lowest incomes by maintaining, in full, council tax support? Lord Mayor, across the council, that position, in the face of quite savage ideological attacks from central government, is something that we can treasure, that shows there is a different path to the politics that says there is no alternative. We must outsource. We've got to cut back. A scorched earth that leaves our public services decimated. The amalgam of our socialist values and our pragmatic implementation shows a powerful, progressive alternative, which is why I commend this budget to the Council.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Right, we now go on to the amendments proposed by the opposition groups.
Do I formally second reserve my right to speak?
Sorry, I will do. And we have 30 minutes altogether for this item, with a number of speakers commenting for and against after we've had it proposed and seconded. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. First of all, I'd like to join Councillor Turner in thanking officers for their help in this process. Dedicated and well-informed support to all members of the Council, as always. This is an amendment. This is not a budget. It's an opportunity to make priorities, to suggest changes. As Councillor Turner has said, priorities are about choices. They're not always easy choices. But this gives an insight into some of the choices that we, as Liberal Democrats, consider to be important for Oxford. So let's start with where we will save. My colleague, Councillor Wade, will speak further in seconding this about the main items in our amendment. But let's just start with the Seacourt Park and Ride. Many members of this council were involved in the planning process. I think it is fair to say that the case was not universally accepted. We don't accept it. We don't believe that it is the right thing to do. We are concerned, indeed disturbed, to see that the council is spending money turning green verges as part of the Great Estates project into car parking. That seems to us to be exactly the wrong priority. We are concerned that there is an aspiration to move towards low and zero emission vehicles, but there seems to be no mechanism for putting a budget into that. So as far as savings are concerned, they begin at home. We need to cut our own cloth. We said before that we think the executive board could usefully be a little smaller. It wouldn't make a huge amount of a dent in the budget, but we're asking members of our community to live within their means. We believe that we should do the same. We believe that the comms team could equally do an entirely efficient and creditable job for this council with a slightly smaller staff. As far as the non-statutory second deputy leader is concerned, we've had that discussion. Let's not have it again. We wouldn't pay for it. So let's turn to where we do want our spending priorities to fall. Our big priority is homelessness. Councillor Wade will talk more about our proposals specifically on this. But I'd like to refer to a couple of other spending priorities identified in our amendment. There's been much talk in the council recently, including at the Scrutiny Committee, which I have the honour to chair, about community engagement and about the relative performance of this council in engaging with our diverse and varied communities across the city. Some concern was expressed about the performance of this council in that respect, and indeed the scrutiny report specifically noted as a matter of regret that there is no dedicated officer support in order to do that. Our budget amendment will provide that dedicated support. My party has a proud record of standing up for the environment, and if you want any proof of that, just have a look at what the Tories governing nationally on their own have done to the raft of initiatives that were introduced under the coalition government. And I know how fond this council is of praising the activities of the coalition government. And I hope that's somewhere where we would indeed all agree that the coalition government performed rather better than its successor. We have a modest proposal, but I think an attractive one. We've put it into our budget amendment before. We would plant a tree for every child born in Oxford. It's easy, it's attractive, it works elsewhere. It would help to bring to the attention of the residents of our city and families in particular the benefits of our green spaces to air quality, to urban natural capital. We will also pay for a new air quality monitoring station in St Clement's, the place where air quality in our city is even worse than in other places. And finally, Lord Mayor, our proposal to fund a first-line practitioner for young people needing help with mental health issues. We all know this is an area where demand is growing. Children can wait up to 9 months for a referral, during which time, of course, needs can become more complex and harder to treat. This model provides for a non-medical practitioner to whom schools and others can make referrals far more quickly. Those who don't then need to be referred into the clinical system can be given appropriate treatment at an earlier stage, thus relieving pressure on waiting lists. There are a number of models. Practitioners of this kind have been placed by the CCG in various places around Oxford, including charities. The charity Place to Be works to put workers of this kind into schools, building on the old school counsellor model. Our budget proposal deliberately doesn't specify one model or another. It would be worked up in the most appropriate way. This, of course, will not solve the problem. It won't come close to even scratching the surface of the problem. But it's our belief that we as a council should indicate our determination to be involved in this issue and to do what little we can to help. The evidence is out there. The Association of Colleges produced just one among many reports into this very issue. And I'm absolutely certain that if we looked around this chamber, we would find many, perhaps most of us, who could tell stories from our own personal and probably family experience about this issue. I commend this budget to council, amendment to council.
Thank you, Councillor Gant. Seconder, Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Councillor Gant has already trailed what I'm going to say about homelessness, so I shall speak briefly about Seacourt and homelessness, which in the context of the budget amendments are linked together in a way that they aren't on our streets. I respect what the ruling Labour group is doing for the homeless in this budget, but I believe that we could and should do more. We are facing a social epidemic not seen since the end of the First World War, when our men, back from the front, could be seen on street corners in every city, and that included Oxford. You can see the photographs. That was 1918. This is 2018. We need to show that we've learned something over the last century about how to care for our fellow citizens. So, where is the money coming from to house people properly, and what should the housing be like? Money first. There is approximately 3.4 million still to be spent on the building of the Seacourt extension. Apparently $1 million has already gone in fees and preparatory work, which suggests what a dubious and difficult development this has been from the start. You've heard again this evening from Barbara Witkowski about the damage that the development will cause to our green spaces, to our wildlife, and to our floodplain. So if we don't build the Seacourt extension, we have 3.4 million to spend on more worthwhile projects. But the Liberal Democrat proposal is more modest than that. We would leave money in the capital reserve because we understand about needing a cushion in very difficult times. But we would take 2 million for the additional purchase of housing units over and above the 5 million in your Labour budget. These would be for those who are homeless, either because they've been evicted from private sector accommodation because they haven't been able to pay the higher rents that landlords are allowed to demand, or because they've fallen through all the safety nets and ended up on our streets. And the reason for buying small units is that small units work. They rehabilitate people, whereas big hostels don't. There is an endless sad progress from hostel to the street, to hospital, to hostel, back to the street, back to the hostel, back, and so on. So it goes on. On 1st July last summer, I went to a conference about homelessness in Oxford. It was an eye-opener to me, and I wish you'd all been there, I really do. Speaker after speaker from charities and churches stressed that small units were the way forward. Hostels were just a sticking plaster. They don't solve the problem. Finally, I haven't got much time to talk about the 9K for the vending machine. It's a brilliant idea which already is working as a pilot in Nottingham. Homeless people are supplied with a token a day, which enables them to access socks, pants, shaving equipment, toiletries, fruit, all the stuff that we take for granted. This is a sticking plaster solution, but it's a good one and it works. I commend our amendments to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Wade. Councillor Tanner. Now we have time for about 5 speakers. I'm trying to balance it across the piece. Councillor Tanner, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor Sinclair, Councillor Gough, Councillor Simmons. How about that? Everyone written that down, I hope. You remember. Councillor Tanner, you start.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm disappointed in this Lib Dem budget. I would have thought they could have come up with something better than this. I mean, I accept that there are different views about extending the Seacourt Park and Ride. I think it will be an enormous success and will intercept cars that would otherwise try and get into Oxford and cause a lot of jams. I don't accept that we are destroying the badger habitat, and I think it's a good idea, but that's a matter of opinion. Where I'm really surprised is this idea about planting more trees. All the time I've lived in Oxford, 30 years, we have planted more and more trees successfully year after year after year, and the city is full of trees. It's known as a city that's full of trees, and long may that continue, and that policy. Do you know how many trees we have under the direct control of Oxford City Council? Never mind about in private gardens and parks and all the university parks and so on, under the City Council. Do you know how many thousands of trees we have? Is it 10,000? Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? It is. It's 102,000 trees. If we carry on planting extra trees every time there is a birth in Oxford, we will not make a significant difference to the number that are there and being planted at the moment. So this is a daft idea. It doesn't make any sense. We don't have a huge tree shortage. We have a forest, and it's growing by the day. The other point I want to make, Lord Mayor, is about this idea about air quality monitoring station in St Clements. You know, it's not needed. We have an air quality monitoring station outside the town hall, which tells us exactly what's going on. We've got plenty of measurements. We've got a diffusion tube already in St Clements. We're planning a second diffusion tube, but we are getting on with the job of dealing with the pollution. It's not the measuring that's the problem. Oxford stands out as a council across the country for measuring pollution. It's doing something about it. And in St Clements, we have already been talking with the local councillors and with the county council, and they have agreed that they will now start consulting the public and the bus companies about moving the bus stops so that there won't be the same polluting buses stopping and starting in that confined area of St Clements Street. So, you know, we're already on with the job. And all that the Lib Dems want to do is measure what's happened in the past. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to speak about Headington car park charges. I'd like to draw an analogy here. Somewhat flawed, but it works. I buy a loaf of bread each week. It costs me £1. Now I find out that my loaf of bread next week will cost me £1.47. How do I feel about this? I feel shafted. That's ridiculous. I can't afford that. How can they justify that? Greedy money grabbers, I think. Then I think, well, maybe I can eke out the bread, make it last 2 weeks and go to the shop less frequently. But actually, I quite like talking to the shop assistants. And then I think, wait a minute, the same loaf is sold at the store on the ring road now and it costs £1. I'll go there instead. Little wonder that small independents are worried about such a huge jump in the charges. They're worried that people won't come and use their stores. Our amendment mitigates the extent of such a huge rise. People are paying £1.70 at the moment for up to 2 hours. This is going up to £1.70 for only 1 hour, and up to 1 hour, and £2.20 in our amendment, and £2.20 for 2 hours, and that will retain the 50p differential. The Labour group are proposing £2 for up to an hour. That's a very big rise. People are paying £1.70 at the moment for 2 hours, and that will go up to £2 for 1 hour. Now, don't forget that Headington Shopping Centre serves not only Headington people, but also residents from Sandhills, Barton, Risinghurst, Quarry and Wood Farm. Oxpen's charges have been frozen because it has a competitor, and that's Westgate. When I door knocked in Bickerton Road yesterday, people told me that they will park at the JR instead of the Headington car park. It will cost them a lot less. It'll cost them a lot less, £1.40, as opposed to £2 at the city car park. Apparently, several of them are doing this now, and I find that worrying. This is a huge error of political judgment. The initial proposal was withdrawn after 500 people objected. These latest tweaks have been done without consultation with residents or businesses. Please be big enough to think again and do the right thing. Please support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Wilkinson. Councillor Simmons, can we move to the Green Party?
Thank you, Chair. And I just noticed there are lots of similarities in between the Lib Dem and Green budget, and not because of any collusion, I assure you, but because the actual sort of flaws in the administration budget, for all its good points, and we've been through many of those already, are so obvious. And so it's no surprise, perhaps, that we're both addressing some of the same problems, possibly with different solutions. And the biggest of these is, you know, things like Seacourt. And And as John Tanner well knows, even his own group is in disarray over this, with some people on planning supporting it and some not. It's very disingenuous of him. Yes, I know, but it's disingenuous to him to assume that there's somehow some administration position, when in fact it's... or to condemn other... So as we know, there are many coherent arguments against C Court, that even some of his own members were swayed by at planning. And so it's quite right that we question it and continue to question it, because it's all very well saying, oh, well, it intercepts cars going to city centre, but it's already intercepting cars going into the city centre. And of course, we still have congestion and pollution problems in the city centre, not because of the park and ride, but because the Westgate is, undermining car parking charges. And so is Octopens, with the full agreement of this council. So that's the reason. It's because it's cheap to park in the city centre, not because it's expensive to park at the park and rides. And on air quality, I mean, it's good that John Tanner actually can tell what's happening in St Clement's from an air quality monitor in the city centre. That's very sort of good of him, and I'm sure he's got some sort of talents that he'd like to share with us. But in fact, it is about reductions. It's about measuring the success of various measures to see that they actually reduce. So we are agreed on some common problems. I don't think we agree entirely with the solutions the Lib Dems have put there, and certainly not, the car park reductions. But I just put a point about the plant a tree. I mean, John Tanner's been around long enough to remember that it's not just about new trees, it's about replacement trees as well. And we had a very successful use of Headington Hill Park for an AIDS park, where we had trees commemorating people who suffered from AIDS. And it's very well loved, still well loved, very well used park. And I think having trees associated with people, I mean, I planted a tree in my garden to celebrate my daughter's birth, and I'm sure it'll be something valued for others who maybe don't have gardens or don't have access to the space to do that. So I think there is something in that. I think it needs further thought, but overall it's challenging some of the same problems we see, but actually not all the same solutions.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I probably need to declare an interest in that I'm actually a Headington resident, but I have to take Councillor Wilkinson to task, where I've just received the latest missive from the Lib Dems. I get one regularly. And the headline, would you believe, is Labour car park charges shocker. And Councillor Wilkinson has spent the whole time talking about that. And yet, when we look at their amendments, the first sentence says, our priority is helping the homeless. That's what you should be talking about. Car parking charges. As Councillor Turner said, we are trying to discourage people coming in to the city and use the public transport. And I have to say that Headington car park is called the Waitrose car park. Waitrose is populated by the well-heeled. And you will see people that are using Iceland supermarket, probably getting on a bus with their full bags. But what I wanted to talk about, particularly in my portfolio role, is the statement that is included in their amendment, which says, we need better engagement with our diverse communities. Well, let's be clear. Just by making a statement like that doesn't mean to say that there is a great deal of work going on in this area. We have locality officers across the city in areas where there are the greatest challenges, and they are working extremely hard in bringing through our policies on equality and diversity. And it isn't about having one officer, it's about all of us, including members and officers, making sure that that policy is embedded in our thinking.
Thank you. Councillor Gough.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Our amendments suggest the funding for a wheelchair-based swing for children to use who are disabled. A family in my constituency would have benefited greatly from this.
though the disabled youngster is now too old to use such a facility, he now has a specially strong buggy that required a lot of fundraising. I am sure other families with disabled children would benefit from suitable play facilities, and this would be a great start. Thank you.
We have time for one or possibly two more speakers. Councillor Taylor? Sorry? And Councillor Haynes? Yeah.
Yes, well, first of all, I can't believe what the Labour Party is saying about Headington car park charges. I was born up in Headington, and as far as I'm concerned, Headington now is Brooks, copy-priced houses, estate agents, and charity shops. And I was only talking to one of the people from Headington on Saturday. They're really worried about the situation over this car park charges. All we've got now are Waitrose and the supermarkets, whereas years ago we had individual shops, but doing very well indeed. And now it's turned into a joke up there, quite honestly, on Headington. And I do hope that those car park charges, they think again, and we keep them as what they are at the moment, because otherwise they're struggling, the retailers in Headington at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to take issue with Councillor Gant's concerns about converting grass verges into car parking on the Great Estates. As one of the Lees councillors, I would say that these verges are already used as car parking. They're churned up, they're muddy, they're unsightly. Parking is a major issue on the doorstep. The houses were built in the 1950s where people were, households were lucky if there was one car. The reality of life now is that adult children can't afford to leave the family home, and most of them decide to have cars to get to work, to get to social engagements, whatever else. And we can argue about the rights and wrongs of that, but that is the reality for life. Car use has increased exponentially since the 1950s. There are garages, the garages aren't big enough for cars to live in, and also many people use garages to actually store things because the houses aren't that big. The improvements that are planned are improvements. Grass code allows grass to grow through, and there's careful use of landscaping. So rather than having churned up, muddy, ad hoc car dumping grounds, we have got proper car parking places. As you would know, if you actually went and talked to the residents on the Lees, this is very popular on the doorstep. There was an issue at planning last week, which I suspect that both the Lib Dems and Greens have jumped on. That was one resident who wasn't complaining about the need for car parking. He was concerned about the car parking that was offered. I would urge you to think again about this proposal, because actually in terms of meeting the needs of the people who live on the estates, it's nuts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Turner, can we have your response now, please?
Yeah, thanks, Lord Mayor. You'll be sorry to hear I don't think we'll be accepting the amendment to the budget this time. Just a couple of comments, pick up on what colleagues have said. I do hear the point about Headington car park charges. I think at the end of the day, this is about setting priorities. I must admit, I expect it to have a slightly higher priority in the Liberal Democrat budget amendment, because a lot of their things that they say are important, they put in throughout the life of the budget. This turns up as a one-off, and then the whole increase gets implemented in 12 months' time, which is a funny old fact. On issues around housing and homelessness, again, it's good to see they've discovered these issues. I checked last year, there was not one item on these matters in their budget amendment, so it's good they've been found. I would make the point that part of the issue around Seacourt is a good investment for the council, because we'll get a return. That will go into our PACE budget in perpetuity. And it's precisely by having a sound-based budget that we are able to fund our frontline services. So that's why that sort of investment, any sort of investment, regardless of the rights and wrongs of the particular one, is so important. I do welcome the interest in housing. I just wonder, because it's okay to pick a few bits out of a budget, pull off a line, will we at long last be hearing from the Lib Dem group support for expanding Oxford to the south of Grenoble Road? If we don't, Lord Mayor, I fear these are crocodile tears. One last point, picking up on what Councillor Taylor just commented on. I'm really irritated about this sudden... It's quite strange. We've got a millions of pounds of housing revenue account budget. The only amendment that comes forward from either of our opposition groups on it tonight seems to be about money for car parking. No wider commentary on the wider issues at all. And then in this amendment, it flies in the face of all of the consultation that we do with our tenants. It flies in the face of all of the things that we're hearing about people's areas and the way they want to see them look. And I just think it flies in the face of any sort of respect for our tenant body as a council. It wouldn't have happened, I think, in days when Liberal Democrats also aspired to win seats in places like Barton and when they had councillors that would listen. My encouragement to them is to start listening again. In the meantime, Council, vote against this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Turner. Councillor Gant, sum up.
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor. You know, the arguments have been rehearsed several times. There's probably little point in going over them all again. As far as the car parking on the verges is concerned, you know, the fact that they are currently a muddy mess is not necessarily an argument for carrying on as we are. What we'd like to see is a proper review and a proper planning policy around this issue. As far as Grenoble Road is concerned, I mean, you know, that's not, as far as I know, part of the budget. But I hope Councillor Turner will accept that, you know, we have made thorough and forthright contributions to the debate around Oxford's housing need, what it should be, where it should go, who should live in it, how they should pay for it, and all of those kinds of things. So let's deal with that matter at the point at which it comes up. John's point about planting trees. Well, sorry, is there a problem? Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I think you'll find nobody on this side has actually burst out laughing in the middle of your speech, Ed. John made a point about planting trees. He seemed to think that the fact that we plant trees is an argument for not planting any more. Well, you know, Craig is right. This is an attractive idea. It is something that has worked well. We have indeed used the principle in this council in recent past of using planting trees in honour of particular individuals as a way of marking their contribution, and this is a way of extending that proposal. As far as the car parking issue in Headington is concerned, first of all, it's not the Waitrose car park, it's just next to Waitrose. Why is the rise only in for 1 year? Because it needs a proper review after consultation rather than just being rushed through and imposed as it is at the moment. I think Councillor Haynes put it very well, or if I could put it another way, I agree with Mick. He spoke very, very well about that particular issue. This is an ill thought out proposal, and Council needs to take the opportunity to think again about it by supporting this amendment. It's regrettable, really, that you know, we were told that we didn't talk about homelessness, which is the main item in our budget amendment, because of course we did exactly that, and Councillor Wade has made some detailed, practical, principled proposals for going further. I would just like to repeat that we support and admire what the administration has done on this. We would like to go further, and we are presenting a practical way of doing that. Nobody saw fit to mention the idea that we have put forward around supporting the mental health needs of our young people. I regret that. Your opportunity to signal your support for that is in this vote, and I would ask you to support this amendment.
Now, can we have those in favour of the Liberal Democrat amendment, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll do my 7 minutes and then hand on to Councillor Thomas. This is the time of the year when the city sets the overall shape of the budget for the next 4 years. And as in previous years, the opposition have taken an active role in shaping the budget. Finance panel, and again, pay credit to James Fry for his hard work, have prodded and poked the budget numbers, made many formal and informal recommendations. And also, of course, the officers and indeed CEB have been very responsive and listening to that, and finance officers have done a great job at organising the budget, and their hard work and very positive engagement with the whole process is much appreciated. Of course, we get to this point and the administration understandably stand up and say, this is a Labour budget. It's not, it's a council budget. And I think the reason why there's so few arguments about council tax support, living wage, investment in housing is that we had these debates at Scrutiny and Finance Panel, and they've gone through council processes, and we've all agreed. No one is saying that we don't agree. This is the shared values that Ed Turner spoke about at the beginning. There is a lot. This is a progressive council. I'm very proud to be on a progressive council that cares so much about people and that resists the intervention of the government. And this is as it should be. We create a large amount of consensus through the process, and then we end up debating a few points that we disagree politically on. And most of these will come as no surprise because we've been saying them throughout this whole same process. Seacourt Park and Ride, the community centres. You know, these are things we've talked about repeatedly and won't go away. We'll continue to talk about them because we don't agree. We have a changing landscape, of course. We've heard a lot about the government. We've heard a lot about... We also have, of course, a government, under the thumb of rabid right-wingers, and that scares me and should scare all of us, and a divided opposition. And again, unless there's some major changes, this budget will span our country's departure from the EU. And as I alluded to earlier, the significance of that to this council, to our economy, our social and environmental policy cannot be underestimated. So against this uncertainty, it's very easy to lose focus, but the council must continue to challenge government, of course, and vigorously oppose Brexit, of course. But it must also look at what it can do to make this city better within its own sphere of, albeit limited, its own sphere of influence. And I wrote down something actually that Mike Rowley said at CEB because I thought it was quite words of wisdom. He was talking about homeless services, but I think he could have been talking just as easily about pretty much any of the services we provide. Is that we can pat ourselves on the back, but we cannot relax. And I think that's so true. And as the opposition party, we've got a duty to make sure you don't relax, to continuously scrutinise what you do, to question the decisions you make, and why you make them. And I think, frankly, we do quite a good job because we've got a largely consensus budget here because of lots of decisions that have been made along the way, but we have some differences. And and although ours is a budget amendment, it's actually quite financially significant. It's more than £6 million we would mostly generate, but also redirect from other uses. And I say one of the worst decisions which we've already spoken about, and no doubt we'll come back to it, is the decision to go ahead and spend £3.5 million on Seacourt Park and Ride. The arguments will be well made in planning. There's no demonstrable lead. We have issues around wildlife, and it will track traffic through already congested ring road and radial routes out of the city. It won't solve any problems. And for a city to be relying on income in the future from an unsustainable mode of transport, something we know we must tackle if we are really serious about climate change, I just think that's poor long-term thinking. But there are other bad decisions: to sell off community facilities, spending more than £1.5 million paving over parts of our estates, cutting voluntary sector grants, ending the small cycle scheme, and so on. Some of these are quite small things and things we can easily address, and our budget amendment tries to do that. Of course, there are also decisions, and many of them, which are well-meaning, but we think simply don't go far enough. And if we're serious, for example, about reducing our carbon footprint, as we have said we're committed to doing, we need far more investment in energy efficiency and renewable energy than this budget provides. It's the same for homelessness. It's really excellent that we're increasing the money from 2019, but actually, given it's 400% increase in rough sleeping in Oxford, far higher than the national average, we actually need more money than that to really address, to make sure everyone can access a warm and safe bed at night. And people can go further than that and really contribute to society in the longer term. So our budget amendment tries to go within the limits of these financial constraints, the influence we have as a council, try to addressing some of these things. Clearly, we delete Seacourt Park and Ride. We also we go along with increasing, of course, the planned increase in city centre parking charges. And I don't know why it's down as 1%, because by my maths it's considerably more than 1%. But anyway, I think it's more like 6%. But also, we've also halved the money to be spent on the green spaces in the estates. We haven't gone as far as the Lib Dems, because we take on board the fact that some of the schemes are useful and genuinely needed. We use some of that money to invest in renewable energy. We also put some money aside to improve homeless facilities in the city, and also recycle some of the money saved by not paving over the green estates back into the estates themselves, so that the users of the estates and the residents will benefit. We've also done some things like small things, but we think influential, purchasing an additional street cleaning machine to allow our staff to work in more comfort. I won't go any further because my colleague's going to use up the remainder of the 10 minutes, but I just would commend this budget amendment to Council.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. The seconder, Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. So yeah, I'd like to just to say thank you to hard work of officers and the Chair of Finance Committee for getting the budget to this stage. It is a very good budget in many respects. And it's really, as points been made, what we're talking here about are small differences of political priority. I was taken with the discussion we just had about shopping at Waitrose or Iceland. I shop at Co-ops, I'm not quite sure where that puts me in terms of... but we have to remember for lots of people here in Oxford, that they cannot afford to go to shops at the moment. We have a huge demand here on food banks. And one of our small amendments is we're putting some money in for extra work to try and end food poverty, which is a scourge on this city. And I would like to see this council take a greater lead in addressing and acknowledging food poverty. We were also, like the Lib Dems, trying to take forward the funding on homelessness. I'm very pleased to see that there'll be 200,000 extra in years 2, 3 and 4. But my concern is that that will be taken up pretty well by the extra funding that will go into the A2 Dominion extension, leaving us basically where we are at the moment. So in our budget, we have been able to find an additional 200,000 in year 1 to start to tackle what is going to be one of the biggest pieces of work this council is going to have to do with what will come out of the big conversation. We think the money should be there to deal with the expectations and ideas that will start to germinate. And we've also found additional money in the capital budget for homelessness. One of the things that disappointed me massively last year was the attempt that we made to try and find suitable accommodation for people with no local connection to help themselves. And one of the sticking points was that there was no capital money available to bring any building up to standard. So in our budget, we found money to make sure that doesn't happen again when these buildings are found. So that's really all I wanted to say, and I urge you to vote for our amendments.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Right, I need some speakers. I have Councillor Price, Councillor Brandt, Councillor Wilkinson. Hang on, let me write some of these down so I don't forget you. We have Councillor Cook. Probably put in Councillor Rowley for the moment, and we may have to take some more later. Depends if we have enough time. Thank you. Can we start with Councillor Price, please?
Lord Mayor, thank you. I wanted to just make a point about the Seacourt Park and Ride, which seems to have been forgotten in a very tactical and rather populist approach which the opposition parties are taking. The Park and Ride system was established in the early 70s by the first Labour council that was elected to this council. Because if you recall, before that, there were about 25 years of shilly-shallying about whether they were going to destroy large parts of the city centre for urban motorways and create a kind of ring road around the city that would relieve the high street and so on. So the Labour Party position at that time was to introduce the balanced transport policy, which the late Albert Ramsey was the architect of. And what that did was then to say, we're not going to destroy the city centre, we're not going to create urban paradises for the motor car. What we're going to do is to encourage people to leave their cars at the outskirts of the city, and we're going to prioritise bus services, cycling and pedestrian. And now, 40 years later, 45 years later, we are in a position where we have to think about that policy longer term, because the processes that we're looking at are obviously have changed. And what this will allow us to do is to carry on that process by not just closing the high street to certain types of vehicles, not just closing Core Market or Queen Street to certain vehicles, but creating our zero emission zone, creating the situation in the city centre which, as we've seen with the demand management proposals from the county council's consultants, could be pretty radical in terms of preventing access by the personal individual motor car. And to do that, we need a ring of successful park and rides, which are close enough to the centre to allow for rapid, quick journeys in, linked to a rapid bus transit system, which will go for longer distances to places like Aynsham, to Kidlington, to Kennington and Abingdon and so on. That is the future of transport in the city centre, together with, I suspect, quite a lot of other changes we'll see over the next 10 to 15 years. But that's a basic architecture of what we'll see. And without the Seacourt Park and Ride, that system becomes virtually untenable, because you're not going to get the same level of usage for the kind of things the County Council did talk about for some time and now seem to have completely forgotten, which was outer rings and park and rides a long way out, which are expensive and difficult to support. So the key to the future is to look long-term, not short-term, as the opposition are doing, and weeping crocodile tears over what they call precious greenbelt land, which fulfills none of the criteria of greenbelt criteria. If you look at the way in which greenbelt designations are defined, none of those criteria apply to the bit of land we're talking about here, particularly the one which is about linking communities, because of course Botley and the west part of the east part of the city are coterminous. They segue one into another. So effectively, it is a bit of crocodile tears for that piece of land. Dominated is also by pylons and by the commercial buildings on either side. So it is a complete nonsense to say that you're going to create some sort of concrete jungle in that area. It's already there. Also, in terms of flooding, the EA supported the planning application because it was going to improve flood retention rather than reduce it. So we should reject the opposition amendments entirely.
Councillor.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'd like to highlight 4 points from our budget amendment: the restoration and installation of water fountains in the city, the redirections of funds from paving over green verges to improving them and upgrading the environment and upgrading the benefits to the community, the new community climate fund we're suggesting, and an increase in the Salix fund. Each of these points, if implemented, will contribute to a more resilient city and a more thriving community in the faces of the challenges we know are coming our way because of climate change. Access to clean, safe drinking water is a basic right, and I don't think I need to convince anyone here about the importance of reducing single-use plastic. Water bottles and other soft drinks are a big proportion of that. But it is more than this. This is also an opportunity to help support the Sugar Smart campaign, as access to free water means people are less likely to buy sugary drinks. It will also help our residents save money by not buying more and more bottles of water. This is especially important as summers become hotter and drier. People need to access safe, free water when they're going about their business on a hot day. Now, as more and more evidence is gathering about the importance of green areas to the well-being of people, even small spaces, both physical and mental well-being, as well as their importance in mitigating flooding, which we know will become more frequent, it is simply madness to start paving over so many of these spaces. We should be doing the opposite, if anything, creating new areas, not paving over all of the existing ones. And especially if we do that for the benefit of a specific subsection of the community, namely car owners. What about the rest of the community? What about young people who don't own cars and can't afford to own cars, but are still going to breathe more polluted air? You talked about consultation. Has there been any consultation about plowing that money in other ways to support the community? So we've proposed that instead of eliminating these crucial spots, we invest in them and we turn them into an even better asset for the entire community. Now, Council has been making fantastic progress in reducing its own carbon emissions, but we have now reached the point in which continuing with that rate is becoming ever more difficult as the problems we face become ever more complex. So we propose to increase the Salix Fund, which will help the Council tackle the next stage of low carbon improvements and allow Oxford to continue to lead in this field. And finally, Oxford has a unique resource in the dynamic and innovative network of action and community groups dedicated to exploring ways towards a low-carbon resilient society. If we can help them in that task with new funds and by using the growing expertise within our own council to better serve these groups, this ultimately will make Oxford better able to deal with the increasing challenges that climate change will bring, and that, as the other points I mentioned, will benefit the whole city for years to come.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm speaking really in support of what Councillor Brandt has just said. Turning more and more green space on HRA land into parking spaces seems to me to be entirely outside the spirit of the City Council's environmental sustainability strategy. And what we're calling for is a rethink on that. I believe the green proposals are pretty sensible, and I would commend them to everyone to vote in support of that particular budget line.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Whereas the Greens and I both voted the same way on the Seacourt Park and Ride application, I recognise that the Greens' objection is a fundamental one to park and rides in general. My objection was specific to that site, and if the Secretary of State doesn't approve that planning application, then we will still need the money to provide a park and ride somewhere down near Seacourt. And that's why I'm not going to be voting to take that money out of this budget. But I'd like to thank the opposition, both parties, for their amendments this evening. I remember when the opposition would present their own budgets. Yeah. It used to run to 20 or 30 pages. Now we're down to a rump of a single couple of sides of a single sheet of A4. So I think what we need to do is whenever the opposition stand up and make some comments on this budget, they ought to be thanking the exec board members and members of this group who've put that budget together. 99.9% they agree with. So it's nice to see that the opposition amendments get shorter and shorter each year. They're coming over to our side. They're agreeing with us more and more year on year. I appreciate you're left with a rump of gimmicks and hobby horse issues, which you've got to because you're running out of substantial objections to what we're proposing. But thank you for your support for 99.9% of the budget.
Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was going to say that I thought this amendment might have unintended consequences, but I'm not actually sure it has intended consequences. There are a number of large sums of money which, as finance officers politely warn, don't have any particularly detailed schemes as to how they can achieve their objectives. Unsurprisingly, because they're in exactly the areas where the administration has already pledged to commit large sums of money. There's a large sum for refurbishing city centre property, which is few and far between, that can be used for rough sleepers. We've been here before. Lucy Faithful House cost the County Council $500,000 to run before they replaced the beds. There's only $200,000 extra revenue proposed in here, so we presumably have to take $300,000 out of the existing homeless budget, plus it's paid for by removing the Seacourt extension, so in year 5 and after we'd have to take another £200,000 out of the budget. Then there's a nice new pollution monitor in St Clements. We already know that St Clements is the most polluted street in the city. We're trying to address that by discouraging people from driving into the city centre. But the Greens would pay for their pollution monitor by increasing park and ride charges by 50%. So that the monitor would show levels rising more and more above the danger level as half the population of Buckinghamshire choke the most constricted A road in our city driving into town. And then we have cutting the Great Estates budget to pay for some no doubt very nice improvements to grass verges which people will then park on. Members of council, it is only when the last blade of grass has been squashed, the last pedestrian has choked, and the last support service for homeless people has disappeared that we will realise we cannot eat money. We welcome scrutiny very much, and our budget is informed by it. It's nice to hear Craig acknowledging the budget Ed proposed is not party political. On the other hand, the Green budget concentrates spending in a few particularly significant wards at the expense of all the others. I know the elections are coming up, but we can do better than this.
Right. Councillor Wolfe had his hand up some time ago. If we could have a short speech, we'll be able to fit in one more person. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. It's just a short point in case anybody was a bit puzzled by an aerial car transport study. As we're well aware, the county is doing a lot of modelling at the moment on transport in Oxford. The idea for cable cars has come from a number of different directions, as far as I can see simultaneously. Not all of the ideas look terribly sensible, but some of them actually may possibly have some mileage. For myself, I'm particularly concerned about the JR site, which is not functioning as it could be. But it's one of those areas where expertise is needed, and needed fairly quickly. And the small amount of money that's in there would actually be enough to do a sort of study that could dovetail into what the county's doing on solving some of our particular problems, getting tourist buses out of the city centre, perhaps dealing with the JR site, and actually maybe also addressing some of the park and ride issues that we've been talking about. It's a small amount of money, but it needs spending pretty quickly because things are moving fast.
Thank you. Councillor Brown was the next person to have her hand up. I'm sorry, and that will be the end of time. So, Councillor Brown.
Thank you. I'm still reeling at the cable car to the JR, but I was actually wanting to address the issue of Great Estates parking and grass verges, because I think there is a major misunderstanding here. This is not necessarily about creating more car parking spaces. It is also about protecting grass verges. And I can show you plenty of pictures of grass verges in my ward which are massively churned up and which we seek to protect through the Great Estates programme from people who seek to park on them. And that isn't necessarily about creating more parking in a lot of those cases. It's stopping commuter parking illegally, or rather, sadly, legally at the moment, on those verges through the introduction of posts and fences and other mechanisms to stop people. This is a really important issue for many of the people that I represent and many of the people that many people on these benches represent in the Great Estates. And I think it does say something about the opposition's views of tenants, that they don't actually listen to tenants' views on this, which are that they do wish to see their estates look better and have better parking facilities and better green spaces.
Councillor Turner, could you make a response?
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I mean, just to start with a positive, and in a way I'm picking up where Colin left off, but I present it in a slightly different way. I think it would be churlish not to acknowledge Craig and David's comments about the budget and the way there is a degree of consensus around our council. And I'd like to think as well that we do try and respond positively to suggestions If I could give an example, and clearly there are limits to what you can do in a full council budget debate, but actually a lot of the scrutiny reviews that have brought quite far-ranging consequences sometimes for the operation of the council have welcomed the expertise of all councillors. I think the fact, we are talking about a relatively small range of amendments to a very significant gross budget, and a lot of people, even though they might have some reservations, are happy with the direction of travel, I regard as a good thing. And it makes me one of the many reasons why it's actually a really good thing to be a member of Oxford City Council, because actually we do share quite a lot, and we probably do have more in common than in many councils up and down the country. That being said, there are still some significant points of disagreement. I mean, just to tackle the first one head on around park and rides, because the flagship, be under no illusions, Lord Mayor, the flagship of the Green budget is to jack up the park and ride charges just in the city car parks. I mean, I'd be concerned actually we might get some resistance from people not parking in our car parks, driving further to go and park in the cheaper county council ones. But I am really struggling as well to understand the logic of Councillor Simmons' position, where he says a real problem is too much traffic in the city centre because the Westgate is too cheap. Therefore, we were going to increase the car park charges at our park and ride car parks, reduce capacity as well, and then somehow the situation will get better. I really don't see that stacking up. To me, it looks simply like a budget grab on the motorist who uses park and ride and does the right thing. And I just couldn't support it. On a couple of points of detail in remaining time, let's talk about cutting our grants budget. Not so. What's happened is the Greens have noticed that a one-off increase in expenditure, which was reversed out, they're not seeking to reverse out. My understanding is some of that actually related to events which have already taken place. I think there was a festival of some sort. But in addition to that, you'll see in our budget, we're actually proposing to top up the grants budget by more than that in the new CB recommendations, with particular focus on outreach and the arts. So actually, our voluntary sector budget is increasing, quite apart from the very significant extra sum we're putting in for organisations around homelessness in years 2, 3 and 4. So our grants budget is going up rather than down. And then lastly, in response to Ruthie's point about Salix funding, it's right, you can often find a good case for spending more. We've got a significant transformation budget, and if good schemes come forward, I think that's the sort of scheme, if there's a good business case, we can fund through our transformation budget as well.
Councillor Simmons.
Yeah, well, I briefly sum up. Thanks everyone for their comments, good and maybe not so good. I mean, in the limited time, I'd just like to try and deal with this Seacourt thing head on. And it's been called tactical and populist, and in fact, to rely on sort of 40-year-old transport planner to actually inform what we're doing around park and rides is probably not the best advice. I think what the challenge really is for this council going forward, it's strategic, our decision. It's not about trying to move cars around, which seems to be the policy that this council wants to do, and indeed accommodate a growth in cars. It's actually about modal shift. The real challenge for us and other cities is how do we get people out of their cars and onto the alternatives. And that's about investing in rail, and we're very, very lucky as a council that we've got 2 lines into London, and that's ended up a lot of the new visitors to Westgate have in fact come by rail. It's about bus improvements, and it's about looking at innovative solutions, things such as, you know, the aerial cars. It might end up being nothing, but this is something which other cities in similar situations have found works, and so we should actually look at it. Yes, it may end up being nothing. Just as we were looking at trams, we found some issues around trams. All these solutions are things we need to look at, because the future is not going to look like, the transport is not going to look like it does now. We have to think beyond very short-term transport planning into something longer term. And I'd just like to say to, I guess, Councillor Cook and address partly what Ed Turner said as well. I mean, certainly I think, you know, if it's a coming together of minds, I think it's you moving towards us as much as we're moving towards you. And I've been in this council long enough, people scoff, I've been in this council long enough to remember talking about a lot of things which we now take for granted as council policy, which I got up and stood up and was accused of being unrealistic and impractical and a dreamer and all sorts of things, and these are now core council policies. So I think there is a certain degree of movement in both directions. And just, I guess, finally, on Councillor Rowley, I mean, I do expect you to sort of, you know, talk about this, but to turn down an extra 200,000 for homelessness, and especially in year 1, where there's nothing extra in this budget, I think is something you should agree to look at, because this is something, as you said yourself, we can't be complacent. We can pat ourselves on the back, but we shouldn't relax. And on homelessness is certainly we shouldn't relax. We've got increases far greater than you see nationally of rough sleepers on our streets, and we should be doing more, even more than the council's doing, which is already a lot. And yes, I know we do a lot more than other local authorities, but there's still a lot more to be done. And this budget puts money where it's needed to our priorities, which are about air pollution, looking for out for the homeless people, and trying to address climate change. That's so important. Thank you.
Right, now we need to vote. Those in favour of the Green amendments, please. Those against? Thank you. Abstentions? A number of those. Thank you. Welcome back. We'll get back to the budget. Everybody's got all the right papers. Jennifer, would you like to remind us what we all ought to have? Thank you.
Lord Mayor, what people should have in front of them, if they can all see a copy, we may wish a budget amendment for a faster copier downstairs. You should have a set of 3 amendments, one from Ruth Wilkinson and Altaf Khan, one from Councillor Thomas and Councillor Simmons, one from Councillor Goddard and Councillor Gant. Lord Mayor, I should also just say the amendment that started off as number 2 was withdrawn, so you've got numbers 1, 3 and 4.
Thank you. That makes sense. Right.
On a point of order.
Yes, Councillor Tanner?
It would seem to me that we've already discussed at length the Headington car park, and we've dealt with the mental health practitioner.
No, you haven't.
So the only amendment that should be allowed would be the one about sweat. Is that your view?
No, it isn't, I'm afraid. I think people are entirely at liberty to propose amendments that they think are sensible and useful and would be, and it is up to you whether you consider them again and see whether, in the light of more information or different way of funding it, might be something you want to do or not. But that, I'm afraid, is where we're at. So, I'm sure you will make any points that you feel appropriate. Thank you. So, has everybody got sight of the way in which this is going to be organised? We have 40 minutes in total for those 3 amendments, which we don't have to use, but we have got them if we need them. And we do not have a proposal speech. The actual proposal on paper is seen as a proposal, and then the seconder will speak to that amendment. Then there's time for debate, have comments from other people, then we will have a response from Councillor Turner, a sum up from the proposer, and finally a vote. Is all right? Clear? Good? Right. So if we can start with Amendment 1, which is an amendment from, I think, is it from Councillor Khan, if I get it right?
Thank you, Lord Mayor.
No, hang on a moment. Thank you. It's an amendment from Councillor Khan, which will be seconded by Councillor Wilkinson. So Councillor Khan does not speak in that case. I'm sorry.
The proposer speaks.
No, he doesn't. I've just explained that the proposal is what you have written down. You have set down enough information as a proposer, and then the seconder opens a debate. Hang on a moment. Thank you, that's great, but we still have to sort it out so that we explain it to everybody.
Lord Mayor, on point of order, please. Point of order. If you see the sheets here, That's why there's errors, because I wanted to speak and that's why we're done. And now if things change and if this is a politics going on here, we will not...
No, I'm sorry. Please.
So Ruth will propose and I will second and I will speak.
Right.
Yeah?
Can we perhaps let Jennifer explain if it wasn't entirely clear? Please, Jennifer. Thank you.
In front of you does I hope, set it out that the individual amendments are taken as read with the proposer and seconder named by the Lord Mayor, and the proposer does not start the debate, but the proposer sums up at the end of the debate. It's just a method of trying to allow us to get more amendments through in what's quite a short time. However, in this case, it might be worth just clarifying which of Councillors Wilkinson and Councillors Altaf Khan wish to propose and second. One will speak first, but it will be the seconder to speak first, and then the proposer will sum up at the end of the debate.
Have you a point of order, something of that kind?
Well, no, it was just that this is written in my handwriting, so it seems that it's sensible that I propose it and I'll have seconds.
In which case, I think then you don't...
Okay, thank you, Lord Mayor. That's very clear. And it wouldn't have gone to that far if this procedure was clear before. I'm going to talk about labour shocker car park charges. And the next leaflet going part of Headington and the Quarry area says the Labour councillor abandoned Headington car park by saying it is a Waitrose car park. Wealthy people use it and Iceland people don't, and they use the buses. So with this sort of attitude and the way things is said, and as the executive board in the executive board meeting said, that he takes the figures from the behavior. So same terms applying here. The Labour councillors' behavior towards the Headington car park, what's the next they're going to build? Because they're going to put the charges so nobody uses it and make that car park expensive, and so the people keep driving to the city, to the Botley, to Abingdon, to other places, and next build. And as earlier in the debate we heard that we don't want to get too many cars driving through St. Clements. If people are not allowed to park in Headington or can't afford to park in Headington, where would they go? Who would you stop not to drive through the St. Clements? People will drive through St. Clements. People will come to city centre. People will go to Botley. People will go to Abingdon because that car park becomes too expensive to park. It is okay to laugh, but that is the reality. And that is what we are seeing here tonight. So as a simple proposal here, for 1 year, and which I said in executive board meeting as well, that we needed to, for 1 year, keep this as we proposed here on the sheet, the charges, and look at it, essentially get the proper data, not look at the behavior or the observation, but getting proper data and with the program of resurfacing, as we've been told, a lot of people in Headington, they think the car park doesn't need really resurfacing, but the user or the paying daily charges is more pinching to their pocket. So looking that plan as well and trying to work out getting a proper figures, facts, and a professional advice on that, and that way a simple proposal here which does say that where we're trying to find the money for the first year and then move on from that year and make the Headington a vibrant place for the shoppers, for the residents, for the people who come and use not only in Headington, for Marston, North, Quarry, etc., Barton, Sandhill, whole of the North East area, including Oxford. Thank you very much.
Right, now then, people who wish to speak, please. Can I see a hand over there? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Right, just checking. Yeah, well, I'm just checking. I thought you were sort of totting up who put their hand up. A couple of points. First of all, the proposals for car park charges are that the city centre car park charges are the most expensive. St Clement's, as nearest to the city centre, is the next most expensive. So I can't see why people will drive past Headington to go to St Clement's and park there, because it costs them more money. But on the other hand, of course, in the earlier debate, Councillor Wilkinson suggested that somebody would drive from Bickerton Road to the hospital, which is actually further away from the shops than Bickerton Road. So I'm sure you were just passing on the comment rather than endorsing its logic. And then the suburban car parks in the district centres, so those in Summertown, those at Union Street and those at Headington will be the next most expensive, and they will be identical in their charges, and that is what the proposal now is. The only difference that Headington had was the 2-hour ban, which meant that anybody, as former Councillor Pegg said to me repeatedly, loudly, and at close range, over and over again, she objected very robustly at having to pay for 2 hours parking when she only wanted to go and visit any shop, not just a supermarket that has been named, any shop, and stop for 15 minutes. So we responded to the consultation by making the bans the same as they are in Summertown, the same as they are in Union Street, and I think that properly reflects the expert advice that we did get. So when the, I can't remember what he is now, seconder of this motion who moved it, or whatever it is that's just happened, said that there had been no professional advice. That's entirely untrue. The usage figures are based on the proper professional advice of our car parks team, and I think all in all this is a proper, balanced and sensible proposal. And Councillor Altaf Khan's somewhat synthetic rage and leaflet waving, I can't visualise it behind, well I can't see it, but I can visualise the leaflet waving going on just behind my head. Is I think perhaps a little strong, given that all he's proposing is deferring this increase for a year. It seems a little excessive for that. So on that basis, I would propose that people vote against this amendment, not least because, as officers have said in their handwritten commentary on this, taking money away from the resurfacing budgets for car parks is a very poor economy, because what it will end up doing is costing more in the long term.
Councillor Azad? Sorry? No, thank you, Councillor Tanner. Councillor Azad.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just wanted to talk about these amendments, and we heard that Liberal Democrat got some sort of issues about raising car parking charges, but I've just heard Altaf Khan saying no cars will go to St. Clement Road. That's never been discussed. It's only rerouting heavy lorries and buses if we can reduce St. Clement's air pollution, but it's never been said that no cars can come to St. Clement's, and I would like that to be withdrawn. Thank you.
Sure that was actually said, but can we Councillor Ladbroke? Yeah?
Chair, as a resident in Headington and covering the area of northeast Headington as part of my ward, I have a suspicion that St Leonard's car park is free to Headington residents who have a permit. So I think maybe if the councillor lived in her area, she would know that. So this is solely a debate about the Waitrose car park.
Like to sum up? Sorry. Love to. Thank you. Please do.
For a start, you're talking about county council, you're not talking about city council, so that's irrelevant. I do know which people can use the St Leonard's car park, and one of the problems, or one of the interesting things is the St Leonard's car park is half full of resident parking rather than paying parking, but that's a different issue. The rise is too sharp. That's why we're putting in staged increases. If you put in a very sharp rise, then people start changing their shopping patterns and they start going elsewhere. That's the problem. Councillor Pegg would, if she were with us now, have to pay £2 for parking 15 minutes at Headington Car Park. Thank you, Councillor Hollingsworth. And not the £170 that she would have paid currently. Resurfacing Headington Car Park, just to say that I've had several complaints from Headington residents that the car park's been resurfaced and it didn't need to be done, so why isn't the money being spent on something more useful? So, all in all, I would like to say that I'm particularly worried about the effect this might have on, for example, footfall to the library, to the park and to Headington Farmers Market on a Saturday, all of which are very useful social gathering places, and I want to try and promote the vitality of the shopping centre as much as possible. Please support this budget amendment.
Can we perhaps have a little bit less general chatter in the background? It's really not helpful. Councillor Turner, would you like to say something? I'm sorry, I think I probably should have asked you before.
Don't worry. No offence, I don't need to.
Thank you. Right. In which case, we will move to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment to fund this 1 year of slightly reduced charges in Headington, please show. Thank you. Please, can we concentrate on the business for the moment? You can go and chat off. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. We've counted those against. We are now asking for abstentions, please. Thank you. Thank you. Right. Sorry, yes. Well, that might help. But anyway, the amendment is lost. We now move on to Amendment 2, which is proposed by Councillor Thomas, and the explanation is on the sheet, and the seconder will be Councillor Simmons, who will start speaking. Thank you.
Yes, we also didn't know the proposer and seconder was switched, but that's absolutely fine. So everyone here will know about severe weather emergency protocol, which is a policy that we, like many other councils, operate. So provide a warm, safe space for rough sleepers whenever there is a cold spell of at least 3 days is forecast. And it's a policy that's received a lot of criticism, from politicians around the place, because after all, a single night below freezing is enough to make you ill or worse. People such as Sadiq Khan have spoken out against that and called for so-called one-night SWEP. So just any time the temperature dips below freezing, we should be opening up additional beds. And we know the council is looking at this as well. It'd be strange if it wasn't. But we also know that improving SWEP in itself is not a solution. It's a sticking plaster. There are bigger issues that need to be addressed, but SWEP is probably, sticking plasters can be quite useful under circumstances while we address some wider problems. And this is the point about this amendment. It's for 1 year to pay for out of homelessness reserves, to actually start to experiment and understand what the cost would be for running a 1 year trial for SWEP provision, to make it a one-night SWEP rather than 3 nights of forecast below freezing temperatures. We would hope that after that it would gain funding from the wider budget, and indeed some of the additional money that's been proposed in the homelessness budget might be sufficient to fund it beyond that, because we don't know what it's going to cost, so we don't know yet what it is, but we've been told that 75,000 will be enough for a 1 year trial. And if not, we'd be back next year to try and put some more money into it, because it's really very important. And I was walking on Friday morning 2 weeks ago, and I saw someone who'd been frozen by exactly this, a one-night freezing spell. And the ambulance was there taking them away. A young guy, I don't know whether they survived, what happened. But when something like that happens, you just think, why is this policy in place. It's always been in place, so we accept it without question, but it's just wrong. It's frankly wrong. And in a city like Oxford, we should be doing more for our homeless, a lot more, but this is the very least we can do, is to provide them, the very, very least we can do is to provide them with everyone, whether they've got a local connection or not, with somewhere to sleep, somewhere warm, safe to sleep when temperatures dip below freezing. Please accept this amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thanks very much, Lord Mayor. So in order to do this, we wouldn't actually need to pass this budget amendment because, as I understand it, the money is already allocated in the Homeless Reserve. Therefore, what I think we need is a CB report to trigger its expenditure. We wouldn't need a council approval. What's being suggested here is that we spend some of the Homeless Reserve. What we're proposing in our administration budget is an extra £280,000 over the budget period for the Homeless Reserve. And perhaps I should be quite clear one of the reasons why we're proposing to do that. I think we feel and agree with the view that's being powerfully expressed by Craig just now, that provision in the winter months needs to be extended. There is then a discussion about how exactly you do that. One option would be to extend SWEP. So, for example, you open after one night, and I've heard some good arguments for doing that. The difficulty is it relies on existing infrastructure. I mean, a lot of people on 0 hours contracts being called in, and it is relatively expensive. Where our thinking is for next winter instead, and again, subject to feasibility, is we will look to spend some of our Homeless Reserve. I think of this order of magnitude might need to be slightly more, to extend our winter months provision. One option would be doing this. The other option we're looking at is whether we can extend provision all winter round, not just in periods of severe weather, working with voluntary sector organisations, so essentially perhaps an extension of the church's pilot at the moment. Either which way, it is our intention to bring forward proposals to extend provision in the winter months. I think what we're hoping to do is extend it beyond cold periods in those months for the whole year round. And we don't need to pass any extra monies tonight because, frankly, we put the extra money in the Homelessness Reserve in large part because we want to see this happen. So we don't need a council vote to push the button on the money. Instead, we'll simply need a report. And once again, as with the city conversation, I'd give an undertaking to councillors of all groups that we want to work with people on devising the best way of doing it. So I don't think this council is accepting the amendment because we don't want to tie ourselves into the SWEP model of delivery rather than the voluntary sector model of delivery. I'd be quite glad if this wasn't pushed to a vote because I think we are basically agreeing on saying we want to step up work from reserves to extend winter provision one way or another. We're absolutely committed to working with anyone that wants to on us to see that that happens. So I hope that goes some way to alleviating the concerns that have been expressed.
Now I have Councillor Brown, Councillor Wade and Councillor Rowley, and then we will draw it to a close, I think. Councillor Brown first.
I don't actually think I could add anything to what Councillor Turner has just said.
Councillor Wade.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Craig calls this a sticking plaster, and sometimes sticking plasters are a very good idea. Ed talks about next winter and about obtaining a CEB report, but we've all seen people in soaking wet duvets on the streets when the temperature has been above 0. We need to deal with this now, not for next winter, now. 75,000 is peanuts in terms of our total budget, and we should be spending it now. And as a result, my group wants to support this budget. One thing that I will say is that you talked about the church's pilot scheme, and that's splendid, and that should be rolled out. But what we need is better coordination, because the churches are there ready waiting, and people are not siphoned to them. There's not enough management of the process, and that needs to be dealt with probably as part of the 75,000. But certainly, we should be doing it now before the end of February, not next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. The first point to make, obviously, is that this is next year's budget, not this year's that we are debating. I think we're all agreed that we need significantly more accommodation over the winter months. We have been quite given quite a clear steer to officers that, if at all feasible, our preferred option is to extend that provision, which is open every night in the winter months, because sleeping out on the streets when it's 1 degree above zero is almost as risky as sleeping out on the streets when it's 1 degree below. We can, I believe, build on the successful pilot, which was a pilot of a kind, of the church provision. Councillor Wade is quite right that there will need to be significantly more, there'll need to be quite a lot of thought and some resources going into management and referrals, and indeed I've got some initial thoughts from officers on how that would be done and how much it would cost, which we will work up in a more detailed way. It would probably require employing a member or more than one member of staff to coordinate and to assist. But I think you get a lot more. It occurs to me, and I think those in the sector I've spoken to agree, that you'll get a lot more bang for your buck that way, because the need for staff and for volunteers would be predictable and therefore significantly less costly. And also, people with no local connection to the city or no recourse to public funds would know that there was somewhere they could go. They wouldn't have to check the weather forecast or check with the council to see whether or not we had activated SWEP on that particular night. So that's our preferred option. If it proves to be impossible, then we will come back to the option that the Green Group has proposed, or something very like it, I'm sure. Whichever way we do it, we are determined to extend winter provision significantly.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas, Councillor Turner's already had his say, yes? Am I right in thinking that? Yeah, thank you. Councillor Thomas, to sum up.
So, thank you very much for all the contributions to the debate. I suppose the point I'd make is this, that this is an idea that I know I've got it down every night below zero, but let's just accept it's decent winter provision for people sleeping on the streets. Let's take it as that. It's what we're trying to achieve here. How it's actually delivered, we'll leave it to our officers to come up with the best solution, because we've got great officers who will deal with this. But what's happening here is, this is Sadiq Khan is saying we should be looking at this idea. We're saying we should be looking at this idea. We've just received a windfall. It's something I think every political party in this room agrees with. It's something that every individual in this room agrees with. And I think the time has come. If we all agree with it, thinking something's great to happen, here's an amendment to put the funds into it to make it happen, I don't quite see... No, hang on just a minute. The funds kick in the year after next. There is no money here for...
I have a discussion.
In the 18-19, yeah, there's no additional money in that year. So we're talking about a pilot trial for funds for next year. It's not in the budget. Yeah, so we're in the year 17-18 at the moment, and we're talking about next winter, which will be 18-19. There is no additional funds in the Labour Party budget for that year. The 200 kick in year 2.
Can we have an opinion on this one?
Yeah, the 200
perhaps Mr. Kennedy could be asked to give us the position,
so
please. Can you hang on one moment, Councillor Thomas? I need to get this clarified, because it's not right that we're not clear on the situation for next year. Nigel, please.
Yeah, there's, in the consultation budget, there's £200,000 extra from 2019-20 and onwards. In addition to that, in the budget proposals you've got before you, there's 187,000 over the 3-year period from 1920 to the end of the medium-term financial plan. And in addition to that, there's a budget amendment of an additional £93,000 one-off from the additional housing benefit admin grant that we've just received, actually.
Thank you. So that is clear that there is some money in the budget now, in the late amendment, in fact, for this next year. Councillor Thomas, can you sum up in a couple of sentences then?
So, I think we should vote for this and put the money where we want to use it, because the time's come and we should really make a commitment to the council to making sure people this winter are off the streets. And it's what we're all agreeing, so let's just vote for it and put the funding in there.
Thank you. Right, I think...
Can I ask officers to clarify if that's all
this
right?
is...
Because the councillor is talking about...
Well,
two,
all right,
if I may, just
carry
so
on.
people are clear. There were two uncertain issues raised in Councillor Thomas's speech. One was he said there was no money next year. We have now had it clear the money is in a homelessness reserve available to be spent next year, the extra 93k. The other was that in this, I'm reading it, funds for a trial to open up SWEP any night. What the councillor then said in his remarks was to have any extended winter provision, I think, rather than using the SWEP model. Now, those of us involved in these things understand SWEP to mean quite a specific form of delivery. And therefore, if we pass this amendment, we are saying we will transfer money out of the homeless reserve into quite a specific form of service delivery, whereas what the administration is saying is we are committed to delivering a service one way or another. But what the council
that is perfectly clear. Sorry, Councillor Turner, please.
So could officers please explain whether they understand this to be about SWEP, which is what I understand, or any form of service delivery, which is
Hang
what
on.
Councillor Thomas was just
Having listened to Councillor Thomas, I think that he is proposing the specific use of £75,000, if I'm correct. Yes? Thank you. That is what it is. Okay, regardless of whatever else there is, general or whatever. It's a question of whether 75,000 should be put in the budget for next year to be spent on extending SWEP. Yes? I think that's what we're voting on. Any moment? Good. You look unhappy.
Well, no, sorry, I just wanted to clarify that I think the debate that I just listened to suggested that it may be SWEP or another form of winter provision. So I think, no, it's not what it says on the sheet. So I'm just clarifying if, having listened to the debate, we're agreeing the £75,000 to extend winter provision rather than the specific model.
The proposal is to open up SWEP every night. That is the amendment. That's what we're voting on. We're voting on extending SWEP, right? Thank you. Please, those...
also a fact that we're voting not to surface the car park.
We're taking a small amount off the car parks resurfacing budget in order to... That's something else. That's a completely different amendment, Councillor Tanner. I think, you know, it talks about the homelessness. Thank you. Good. Let's proceed to the vote. I don't want to be still here at 10. I don't think you do either. Those in favour of spending 75,000 from Homelessness Reserve on extending SWEP. Thank you. Thank you. Any abstentions? No. Clear what we're voting on this next time. We have an amendment which is proposed by Councillor Goddard. You have it in front of you. And all explained, and the comments from Mr Kennedy on the back. And Councillor Gant, as the seconder, will now speak first.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I won't add much because I've described the proposal. What we've done here is to lift out one item from our budget amendment, the proposal for provision for a first-line mental health practitioner as a separate single-line amendment to be funded by a modest and proportionate phasing, I would describe it, of the resurfacing of car parks, which I think is appropriate. This is a good idea. It will help people. Let's do it.
Councillor Clarkson and Councillor Deadball. Yeah.
Well, I agree entirely with Councillor Goddard and Councillor Gant that this is a very good idea. It's very well meant, but I have very severe doubts as to whether it will actually achieve anything concrete. Most schools do have school counsellors, I'm aware, who will often refer people with more complicated mental health problems, and that's where the problems occur. I know because I've been a carer for a daughter with mental health problems for the last 2 years. The problems occur with CAMS, where there is a bottleneck, and no doubt some of these pupils will be referred
onto CAMS, and that is where the problems occur. There are very severe waiting lists. So while I understand and totally support the idea behind this, I do not think that this is the best use of our money now, because I think it will just be adding more people to a long queue. Where we need to put pressure is on the Mental Health Foundation, so that more money is put into CAMS. Tidball.
I'm really grateful to my colleague, Councillor Clarkson, for setting out the really devastating position we find ourselves in terms of these services, and indeed the practical problems with the proposal from the bench opposite. I'm also will second the rejection because this proposal that they propose we become a frontline mental health service provider. It's a very odd move to suggest that we would do this work directly rather than support organisations whose responsibility it is to do that. And indeed, perhaps to do so, they should remember the fact that mental health service funding dropped over 8% in real terms during the Tory Lib Dem coalition government. The £26,000 proposed does not touch the sides as a result of the consequences of their party's decision-making. This is a one-off proposal when what we need is embedded long-term quality service provided by those with the statutory responsibility to do so. The Lib Dems proposal is insufficient to staff and embed service costs for schools across the city. But what is absolutely unforgivable, and the real shame here, is that they failed to speak to their Lib Dem county colleagues to ensure they supported our Labour county budget motion. Their mental health triage proposal, which is on the table here today, was not mentioned by the county Lib Dems at all in their recent budget, nor included in any of their own budget amendments. Conversely, our county Labour group had a clear commitment to funding an emotional and mental wellbeing service for young people at £500,000 a year budget. What did the Lib Dems do when they had the chance to make a real difference to children and young people's services through our proposed amendment for mental health provision for children and young people? The county Lib Dems sat on the fence and abstained on our Labour amendment. A pity when the statutory responsibility for public health, children's social services and children's services sit with the county council. And the Tories, surprise, surprise, when given the chance to do some preventative work, voted against our proposal. So, thanks to the county Lib Dems, they lost the opportunity to make sustainable change for children and young people's mental health services in the county. £500,000 would have allowed a comprehensive service. What a pity the Lib Dems colleagues on the bench opposite failed to ensure the groundbreaking and sustainable proposal got through successfully.
Remind you that we are actually discussing the amendment for the City Council, not the county. Councillor Simmons, did you wish to say something?
Yes, just briefly, and thanks for putting this amendment forward. I think it is a worthwhile thing. I think some of the criticisms being levied are a bit unfair. I mean, we do lots of things which are outside our statutory duty because we think they're the right things to do. We do a lot of that, and I think long may that continue because, yes, the county is appalling, yes, the government is appalling, and so we have to stretch beyond. We're lucky in a position in a way that we're socially minded, we're a progressive council, and we do lots of things that aren't our statutory duty. So that's not really a reason for opposing this. Neither is a reason for opposing it that it takes some money out of car parking resurfacing, because we had additional money put into that budget this year as an afterthought. I think the only legitimate reason for opposing this is that it's for 1 year only. And I think that's a serious problem because just like in the main budget, actually, we talked about PCSOs for 1 year only. That's also a crazy idea that we didn't get to talk about. But, you know, so something so important should not just be funded for 1 year. Now, that's my only concern about this. And in fact, we haven't had a chance to discuss this, but I think we might have differing views on whether or not a 1 year sticking plaster's the right thing or whether we should vote it down because it is just a 1 year sticking plaster. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Goddard, you sum up. Splendid.
Thank you very much, my Lord Mayor. Well,
This part of the meeting is, of course, a form of what I think in sport is called repêchage, taking specific items which have not made it through at an earlier point in the meeting, or, as I believe a colleague earlier on has referred to them, gimmicks and hobby horse issues for the consideration of council. Well, this hobby horse issue is one of the greatest importance. Nobody's pretending that what we've got here is a sweeping solution to the problem it addresses, but it does address a clear need with a practical solution. A number of colleagues work, as I do, in education with young people, and they will be perfectly well aware of the increasing stresses on mental health for our children's and, I hesitate to say this given my age, our grandchildren's generation. Equally, a number of colleagues I know have children who attend the same secondary school as mine do here in Oxford. They will probably be aware that at that school, one of the largest in Oxford, the waiting list for students with mental health issues to see a counsellor within school is several months long. And as we all know, as my colleague mentioned in the earlier debate, that is several months too long for somebody with severe mental health problems. It gives those problems the opportunity to get significantly worse. This is intended as a means of starting to short-circuit that problem which is there within our schools right here, right now. So, of course, it's not an overall solution. As Craig very wisely said earlier, sticking plaster solutions can be quite useful. I accept the point that it's for 1 year only. Well, this is a budget for this year. If this were tried, if it worked, great. Let's put in funding for it in future budgets. That's not a problem. As the proposal says, it engages in a small but meaningful way with an important, and as colleagues know, an increasingly vital issue. I'm slightly baffled by Councillor Tidball's argument that we wouldn't support it or something similar on the County Council, therefore she cannot possibly support it here. That seems to me to be slightly roundabout logic. I therefore urge support for this motion. It may not make the whole difference, but my God, it'll be a start.
Thank you very much, Councillor Goddard. I failed to call Councillor Turner when I should have done. Councillor Hayes, I think, thought I had missed him. I had actually been watching and don't think you got your hand up soon enough. But I'm told it is your portfolio, but it's a bit out of order if you want to speak now. Do you want to say 2 sentences, perhaps?
Thank you. Just because there was a discussion about the PCSO budget provision. No, that's nothing to do with this one. But it was, I've been trying to catch your eye for quite some time. Well, the only thing I'll say is it's maybe a budget line for 1 year, but we've actually had conversations with the Police and Crime Commissioner, with the police, to find ways of funding that in the future. So it isn't just that we're investing in a 1 year provision.
Sorry, but that really isn't to do with this one.
Funding.
Point of clarification, okay, well, you've made your point. But, Councillor Tidball, you have already spoken. Oh, help. My book of words suggests Councillor Turner.
I don't want it.
Well, it's all it says here in black and white. I think I can read that. Is that normal?
Yeah, he named me, so I think that's allowed.
Councillor Turner can respond if he wishes, yes, and doesn't. But I don't think we would normally call the portfolio holders in this case, Councillor Tidball.
Well, if my name is mentioned, I'm allowed a right to reply.
No, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Hang on. Right. So you're making it basically... right. Clarification, personal or something? We are trying not to prolong the agony this evening too much, but if you want to say something very briefly, I will let you do so.
There was a deep misunderstanding in those on the bench opposite's summary of what I said. What I said was it was a real pity that when they had the chance to vote for £500,000
sorry, Councillor Tidball, I am not having that again.
Their colleagues failed to do so.
No, I am sorry,
He
no.
misrepresented what I said.
Sorry, that happens all the time. From a lot of people. Let's go into that. So I think we need now to come back to the fact that Councillor Goddard summed up, hoping that Council will decide that this something is worth supporting. We've had cases made and we had some comments against. Who among us is going to support this amendment as proposed by Councillors Gant and Goddard? Right, no abstentions? Right, thank you. Well, that Can't possibly make a personal comment. Sorry. Now move on to the main debate. 40 minutes to cover just this debate. Yeah, and then a couple of items after that before we can go home. So, we have Councillor Brown, I think, is going to speak first. Now, I need to make sure that I've got the names down of people who wish to speak, so let me just try to do that. I know, if you start, this is going to be rather a lot. We must have Councillor Hayes, certainly, but let me just see if I can take this so I don't miss people out. It's going to be a problem. We can't have more than 8, but we need to balance it a little bit across the parties. If people can be very brief, more of you will be able to speak. Hannah and... Have we got any people? Got Craig Simmons? Anybody else on that side? I would rather like to have a more balanced debate, please. Don't tempt me in, please. Councillor Simmons? Councillor Khan, thank you. I do actually need to spread it out a bit. Councillor Pressel, you are down at the bottom of the list, I'm afraid, but I'll add you in the off chance that people are brief. Okay? Thank you. Right. Now, Councillor Sinclair first. If people could try to limit themselves to 2 minutes, it would be really helpful to get more people a chance to speak. Thank you. Councillor Brown was going to speak before anybody. Yes, absolutely. Councillor Brown, please. Yeah, I'll get it right eventually. Practice.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll just want to say a few words to introduce this sort of new part of the debate into the Labour proposed budget. In particular, I wanted to draw attention to the work that we're doing in this budget, not just to tackle homelessness, but in terms of rough sleeping, but also to tackle homelessness in terms of preventing it in the first place. And I think that's a really important part of the work that we do as a council. So of particular importance is the money that we are putting into purchasing properties for local homeless families. And in addition, the money that we are also earmarking to provide additional council housing. And that is going to be a very significant part of the work that we do in this city to tackle homelessness. I also want to draw attention to the money that we are putting into the covered market, which I know Ed mentioned in his introductory remarks. I think it's very important that we continue to celebrate the fantastic jewel that we have in the covered market, and that we do put the investment in to sustain it for the future. And we'll be working closely with the covered market traders to make sure that we're doing that. I also want to particularly draw attention to the various parts of the Labour Group budget which address the inequality and poverty in Oxford. We have, again, Ed mentioned in his introductory remarks the importance of the money that we put into maintaining people's ability to pay council tax through our council tax reduction scheme, which we are one of very few local authorities now to do. And does actually mean a fairly substantial contribution from the council. But I think it's very important, particularly in light of the huge costs that are falling on families in the city, both in terms of housing and the reductions that they're seeing in terms of welfare provision. In light of that, the work that we're doing to support the Oxford Living Wage is also very significant and very important in terms of trying to make sure that people across our city are able to afford to live here and afford to be able to look after their families and themselves in a way that we should expect everyone to be able to do. I know that people across the chamber have talked frequently about the importance of people being able to look after themselves and not have to rely on food banks. And that is exactly what we want to see as well. We want to make sure that people are able to earn a living wage in this city and are in adequate and well-provided housing. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Sinclair.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As portfolio holder for communities and culture, I am delighted that this Labour Council remains committed to its significant support for this city's vibrant culture scene and its diverse communities, including those that are living on the streets. Quite rightly, we put homelessness right at the top of the agenda. So whilst other authorities are stepping back, we continue our investment in our community centres, such as Rosehill, East Oxford and Blackbird Leys. We have ensured that in those communities in the city where we know experience some of the more challenging situations, we have dedicated locality officers to ensure that the city's diversity is reflected in our offer of activities and support. This council has retained its grant funding to the tune of 1.4 million, and we have made changes to improve the sustainability of groups experiencing challenges where the bodies are reducing their support. The city's cultural team punches well above its weight. Hence, we are increasing the funding, 50,000 over 2 years, each year for the next 2 years. And we are investing further into the exciting Museum of Oxford project. And we are, sorry, I've just lost my place. Yes, so this extra funding will ensure that we can improve the delivery of match funding bids and will build capacity to continue to bring in high levels of investment into the city. I ask you to support this inspirational budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. In his introductory comments, Nigel pointed out that there are some quite difficult times ahead of us in terms of both the fair funding formula, which the government are working on at the moment, and of course the devolution of business rates. So although we have a 4-year budget ahead of us, there are clearly issues which will come down the track and may change some of the elements in it. But one thing we can be very grateful of, both to the current Chief Executive and the previous Chief Executive, is that we have stability in terms of our pay deal with the trade unions. And I'd like to pay tribute to the trade unions for the work they've done in developing a pay policy over the next 3 years, which gives us a very clear budget commitment in relation to that big aspect of our budget, which is the pay bill. To have that 3-year commitment from the unions is a key element of that stability. Together with the success of the LATCO, or the previously city services, in delivering overachieving against the budget each year in the last few years, in producing benefits for the city which go into basic services. I'd also like just to pick up what Dee was saying about the £50,000 for the cultural education strategy, because I sit on the South East board of the Arts Council, and the Arts Council in the current 10-year funding period have got a very strong commitment to developing the diverse base of British culture, particularly given the nature of cities like Oxford and Slough and other ones in the South East, which have a very multi-ethnic population. And one of the things which they will prioritise in the next period is match funding for projects which actually do what the Arts Council have been asked to do, which is to extend the cultural offer which comes from local authorities and from the wider cultural sector into the minority communities. So to have that £50,000 will make a huge difference to our capacity to extend the diverse nature of culture in the city. It will also, picking up the museum development work, allow us to work very closely with ethnic minority communities in the way in which the museum's exhibits policy develops over the next 18 months. Because one of the key elements of our history post-war has been the growth of the populations both from the Indian subcontinent and from the Caribbean, and that must be reflected in those budgets. So that £50,000 will be well used and will actually bring in significant sums of match funding from both the Arts Council and from other funders.
Thank you. Councillor Smith, and I will go over the other side.
Thank you. This is a fabulous budget which I'll be voting for. It's a budget which supports the provision of excellent leisure facilities in the city and maintains first-class parks, play areas and green open spaces. It includes money which will be spent on our officers working to get the very best out of our contract with Fusion Lifestyle to operate the Ferry Centre, Lees Pools and Leisure Centre, Barton Leisure Centre, Hinksey Pool and Oxford Ice Rink. And there's money which will be invested in our priorities for leisure services, such as a very generous concessions policy, free swimming for 17-year-olds and under in the city, and of course making sure all our staff are paid the Oxford living wage. We're also earmarking funds for improved facilities at Barton Leisure Centre, which will be available for both the new residents at Barton Park and existing residents, alongside money to look after the new 3G pitch and sports pavilion, which is going in there. And of course, we're allocating £49,000 towards providing facilities for Summertown Stars at 5 Mile Drive. And you might expect everyone there to be really happy about it. No, last month they were whinging that they didn't know anything about it. Now they're whinging where it's not quite what they wanted. Well, we are going to provide what the club wants, what Summertown Stars wants, and that's something that I'm really proud that we're doing. Elsewhere in parks, there's money there to maintain and improve 87 children's play areas across the city, including an ongoing investment that we've been making for a decade now of £100,000 per annum in improving those play areas. And who knows, maybe there could be some money in the year ahead for further investment at 5 Mile Drive Rec. Let's cross our fingers about that one. We also look after 900 acres of beautiful countryside and open spaces like Shotover and Port Meadow. We've got 5 green flag parks, a green flag ex-cemetery, and 4 further cemeteries that we look after. So outside of my portfolio area, it's also great to see the investment being put in the budget ready for the Blackbird Leys District Centre regeneration scheme to go ahead. I know that we're about to start talking to development partners there, and local residents are really excited about the prospect of a new community centre, hundreds of new homes and new shops, which will be provided in the city centre as part of a redesigned public realm in the centre of Blackbird Leys. And on Greater State, I've never seen a green canvasser or Lib Dem canvasser on Blackbird Leys knocking on doors. And I think it shows really on your proposals around that. I mean, everybody loves the new landscape parking areas in Blackbird Leys, and they fall into 2 camps. 50% love them because they can't park near their house at the moment and they really want a parking space near their door, and 50% of people are really fed up with their neighbours parking on the grass and churning up the beautiful green spaces. And
Thank you, Councillor Smith. That is your time up.
It's a win-win. So
Thank you.
Just shows how out of touch you all are.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. We heard the debate this evening. Whether it's amendment from the Lib Dem or the Green, I think in a sensible democratic process you agree and you disagree. So it is very obvious that a number of things are agreed by the positions, so that's why an alternative budget is not being proposed. Number of things being said from the administration budget, how lovely it is, and being also said that we want to get on with things, especially with environmental stuff, and the decisions are made. Some of the decisions actually are opposite towards that. They do not reduce the environmental impact, and I can go to the number of lists. I will try to come back to the next points on the verge parking, funds being put, counties being mentioned here. I served myself as a county councillor, and I have supported through the county, the locality or whatever the budget for the county councillors get, to create some of this very needed space. So here we are just going heavy-handed because we got the majority. We want to push this through and not to listen to anybody and create verge parking spaces without having effects and figures and the really deserving and the needed. Moving on to, I heard quite a lot about the diversity and the BME communities. Praises of keeping 1.4 million grant. 2016-17 wasn't last century, wasn't in 10 years ago, it was only a year back. Single BME community did not got a grant penny And that is being discussed in the scrutiny, and the executive board member knows very well. We talked about the leisure services. The local plan target did not met the numbers, and that's also came up in the scrutiny. And then we said it's competition, we are competing. The BME communities, the lady facilities in the swimming pool. Again, we are praising that this is a diverse city. Is this diverse city starting from 2018, or people lived here for last half of centuries? I met somebody yesterday in Headington, moved into Headington 1966, before I was born. So the diverse community lived here for 50, 60 years. And if we go on the details of it, GP referral services, the community centers we talked, we know how we created a second class lease system and a first class lease system for the sum of community centers. So some of things which is very good to say on the face of it, and as I said, a number of things are good in the budget, but there are
Councillor Khan, I'm afraid I have to stop you. I'm stopping
need addressing, and especially the BME community.
Ladbroke, would you follow, please?
I think, Lord Mayor, that this is a remarkable budget. It is such an impressive budget from our administration. We are in a period of what seems like endless austerity. Cuts upon cuts upon cuts in public services. And let's remember where that started. And it started in the coalition government. So those who tear their shirts and weep about the situation now had a direct responsibility in initiating this process. We are in a period of huge cuts at the same time as we have close to record stock markets. We have stock markets that are so rich that the companies are actually buying back their own shares. The commodity prices are so high that the big mining companies are declaring huge dividends. We are in a country of unbelievable richness, and we have such poverty and such atrocious treatment of working people in this country. And this council has to be commended at the highest level for standing out against these huge pressures. And people have spoken about how we've stood out against it. We have done everything we possibly can to strengthen our housing and to support the homeless people. We have done huge amounts of outreach work around the living wage, and we remarkably will, from April, be having a living wage of £9.69, and we have done the outreach with that. And actually, to be fair to our opposition colleagues, they have been part of that process as well. We've spoken to people from faith communities, from justice campaigners, and it is really important that that living wage work is driven forward, and it is so good to see a budget for taking that forward, and actually also to allocate it to some of our teams to take responsibility. So I commend this budget, and I strongly urge people to support it.
I'm going to take Councillor Simmons next, and then Councillor Hayes. I haven't forgotten you, and there are a few more people after that I think we can squeeze in. Councillor Simmons.
I hope by next council my microphone will at least be fixed. Yeah, well, there's a certain cut happening here to the wiring, I think. I mean, as you might expect, and thank you for all that's been said, I mean, as you might expect for the reasons we've already sort of rehearsed, we'll be abstaining on the administration budget. But we can pat ourselves on the back, I think all of us. Not one budget or one budget amendment's actually proposed service cuts. And I think that speaks to a lot of the pride we have in the council and our shared values across the chamber. I'm sure if we had Conservatives in this council, they would be cutting frontline services and putting money, I don't know, reduce business rates or whatever, something like that. More money for business and something purely undemocratic, horrible, and I'm sure we'd all be opposing it. So I think we should thank ourselves lucky that we are talking around, not exactly around the margins. I worked out that it was about 85% agreement on our net budget at least. So that's quite a lot of overlap. But I think we can't support the budget because, you know, we do need more money for homelessness. No one can say, looking around the streets, that we're spending enough on homelessness. And we might have enough from 2019, but that remains to be seen. We're already talking about dipping into the reserves to fund some projects in the meantime. We need better pathway for those without a local connection, and we need, you know, 24/7 outreach, neither of which we have at the moment, both of which would help more people off of our streets. So we do need more. I really hope, and I do hear that there is real support in Labour for doing that, so I do hope that we will see some of this reserve money spent, and also some other services brought forward for homeless. We need to do more to tackle climate change. Again, we're getting to that point where there's difficult decisions to be made. We need more money because it's getting more expensive, but we typically get returns from that as well. And we need to do something to reduce car travel rather than encouraging more car dependency. There's no way, it's just mathematically impossible to increase the number of car parking spaces and, you know, look about reducing car parking prices and still expect there to be fewer cars or less pollution. It's just not possible. And we need to think, you know, beyond the next year or two and what sort of transport strategy we're creating for the future. Even the county's transport strategy is talking about reducing car dependency, and that's something when the Conservatives start talking about that. I said that we've got a duty to make sure the administration don't relax, and I think we're doing, the opposition's doing a reasonable job on that, and I think if we've made you feel uncomfortable, I apologise, but that's our job. And I think I make no excuses for that. But I also think that we need to do more in the future, and we'll continue to push this council to do more in the future. You know, a good council is only good because all of its councillors are good. And I think that's something this council can pride itself in.
Thank you. Councillor Hayes.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. As ward member for St Clements and as the portfolio holder for community safety, I'm going to be voting for this budget because it delivers fairness and safety on a range of fronts. It's delivering council housing in St Clements. Instead of building privately run and privately built student accommodation, we're going to be investing in family homes in a scheme approaching 10 million. We're paying for community police officers who are going to be targeting drug hotspots and tackling vulnerability exploitation. We're extending the playground in Mansell Gardens, which is so used by families from different backgrounds, in a scheme costing £70,000. We're increasing spending to combat homelessness and eliminate rough sleeping through a provision of a further 187k on top of 200k. And on the issue of air quality, we are already spending money on a real-time NO2 air quality monitor. There is a scheme which the council is involved with called STOP, Schools Tackling Oxford's Air Pollution. And one of the local schools that will be open to taking part in that scheme is in fact based in St Clements. So one opposition member said we should live within our means. Let's not double spend money. Finally, I'm delighted that where I live and where I work is going to be having these investments made in it. None of us became councillors in order to see cuts imposed by the Tories. We became councillors because we wanted to support our communities through the toughest times that they'll ever know. And so I'll be voting for this budget because it's a crucial part of that effort.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. I don't want to add too much. I won't be voting in favour of the administration budget. Just to take one tiny element out of it, I'm not prepared to spend £5,000 of taxpayers' money on a made-up job. That would do it for me. A lot has been said about Sea Court. It's the big item in this budget. And I think it's worth reminding Council, when we say that the case was not made, it was a complicated case and it had a lot of details in it, one of which was about the way that the usage of Sea Court was actually measured. You know, in Planning Committee we were given figures about the numbers of cars that used it during a particular day. And it turned out that if somebody drove into a space and then out again, and then somebody else drove into the same space and then out again, that counted as 2 in those figures. How many spaces we used? I think that I make that 1. Also, we've characterised this debate about not expanding Sea Court as about, not encouraging park and ride use. Very much part of the argument to me was to make that we can and should make better use of other park and ride spaces. So I think the case for that is not made. As far as the wider economic picture is concerned, look, I'm going to pick up Linda's point directly. She said that councillors on this benches have whinged about the provision of a new facility at 5 Mile Drive. Well, not me. I'm very happy to welcome it. That's exactly what we asked for, and I am absolutely delighted that the administration has done that, and we look forward to it going further in the future. Labour councillors have also made a point of, and indeed so has Craig, mentioning where values which we share have appeared in this budget. Well, you know, that's a good thing, isn't it? I mean, you know, I think there is much here that we support and much here that we applaud. The housing company, the maintenance of the council's own housing stock. Looking forward, housing is clearly a huge economic issue for this city, and we want the council to go further in making sure that it makes the best use of land in the city and indeed of planning policies and of its input to the planning policies of its neighbours to deliver housing for the people who really need to live and work and contribute to Oxford's economy, and that will be the case that we will continue to make. Those are the elements of this budget that I welcome and I support, but I'm afraid I won't be voting for it.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. When I first saw the opposition amendments, Lord Mayor, I have to admit I wobbled a bit. I wasn't quite certain how I was going to vote. then I read them, then I listened to the debate, and I was absolutely convinced that, I'm probably stuck with a Labour budget because there's no better in front of us. It's got some fantastic bits in. For example, it's got in the Blue Bin Recycling League, which is pushing up our recycling rates, in which the government has taken away the money, and we've replaced it. We're going to have a recycling transfer station at Redbridge, which is going to save us £240,000 a year. When that is built, we'd have to make the trips down to Culham. But the main bit of the budget, which really appeals to me, is the £3 million which we've got out of the government. I take no credit for this, but we have got ace council staff who sit in those offices taking money off the national government, bringing back money that we pay in Oxford in taxes and bringing it back for the people of Oxford. And we've got money to pay for the electric charging of taxis, electric charging on the street for residents. We've got money to pay now for buses to have retrofit so that their exhausts are much cleaner than they have been. And that's all going to come out of £3 million, not of money raised locally or car park charges or anything else. It's going to come out of Whitehall. It's going to come out of government. It's our money back. And that's the best bit about this budget. And that's why, on balance, I'm going to vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Tanner. I can see it was a very difficult decision. Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I will also be supporting this budget because it's carefully thought through, it's credible, it's affordable, and it will make this city a better place to live in. And what I really liked about it was the thread that ran through it, a thread that started with issues around rough sleeping, the most extreme form of homelessness we have in this city, and went through the area of council housing with extra provision, and then the support for people who face eviction from debt and from universal credit. And this is something we haven't mentioned particularly today, but the role of the advice services that we have in this city is absolutely critical. And that helps to prevent an exacerbation of rough sleeping and homelessness. I would take the points from the Liberal Democrats more seriously if their record in government was better. But on the issue of affordable housing, there is a stark statistic. Labour from 2000 to 2001 managed to build 140,000 homes a year. The coalition government, at its best, got 70,000 built, and in an nadir year of 2015, a pathetic 32,500. It really does take the biscuit to get lectures from the need for affordable housing from members of the opposition. And finally, I'd say this, it does kind of defy logic. If a budget is 80% good enough, the opposition cannot vote for it. I think if I went on the street and asked people whether it was 80 or 85% good enough, and you'd rather have nothing in its place and put forward no alternative budget of your own, people would think we were living on some very, very strange planet. So I therefore advise opposition members to vote for this budget because they themselves say they agree with most of it. Thank you very much.
Councillor Haynes.
Yes, I won't be supporting this budget at all, and the reason is I don't think anyone's in this council argued about Marston, because we've had nothing at all in Marston for a long time, and I think it's time that we had some of the money that Blackbird Leys gets, Rose Hill, and the other places get Barton and all, and that's why we'll not be supporting this budget. Thank you.
Councillor Haynes. Councillor Pressel, you are the last speaker.
Oh yes, you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to speak only about Jericho and Oseney Ward. I can tell you later. The points that I wanted to make have been made very ably by my excellent colleagues, so I shall just say how proud I am to belong to this council. Not only are we not making any cuts, we're even putting a lot of money into mitigating some of the poverty and misery caused by the stupid policy of austerity brought in by the Tories and the Lib Dems in 2010 and continued ever since. So I would like to congratulate and thank Ed and Bob and Susan and all the CEB members for this excellent budget and for all they're doing to try and improve things in this city. Thank you.
Councillor Turner, would you like to sum up on that note?
There are worse notes to sum up on, Lord Mayor, I think. Yeah, thank you very much. So, Lord Mayor, we've had a wide-ranging debate. I don't think we want to rehearse all of it. I must admit, I never expected the outer reaches of the car park resurfacing budget to be quite such a point for discussion tonight. But it's good people have gone through the papers in detail. A couple of points which I do want to pull out. I mean, one is, we have, I think, as always in these things, focused on some of the smaller points here. We should also remember some of the really big picture things this council is taking on. We are now an extraordinarily large district council in terms of our gross budget, and we're involved in a great many different types of projects. Think about the local housing company, think about the LATCO, think about the £245 million capital programme. There is a scale of ambition there which is, I think, pretty unusual in our part of local government and shows just what can be done. There are risks associated with that, of course, and colleagues have touched on those. But I think together we're committed to that scale of ambition for sort of local service delivery. It's going to be the role of all councillors and all officers in our organisation to try and make that work. So I think that's actually a very exciting time to be part of the Oxford City Council. If I can make two other points. One, I do just want to return briefly to the point about the homelessness reserve and the increase in funding, and just perhaps explain a little more. So I went through a number of the ways in which we're increasing funding on homelessness. We've deliberately topped up the homelessness reserve. Unless anyone had any doubt, we will be bringing forward proposals as soon as we can to try to improve the availability of accommodation, emergency accommodation during the winter months. And as I understand it, we're able to do that without a further council vote. So again, happy to be involved in dialogue with members from across the council on that. That's our firm intention. What we didn't want to do tonight was commit to one way of spending that money. And so we want to leave the pot intact and then spend the money in whatever way will give us give homeless people, rough sleepers in Oxford, the greatest benefit. And I say that's an undertaking which we're giving to council. So lastly, we've heard generous comments around the train, but I must admit one ringing in my ears a little bit was Councillor Thomas saying at the start of the debate it's a very good budget. I was looking carefully at the Green Group when Craig was saying he probably wouldn't be voting for it. I think I saw Ruthie wince a little bit. Maybe we'll persuade one or two opposition colleagues tonight. Whether we do or not, I think we can be confident that our officers have worked really, really hard to give us a strong organisation which to work. Our staff are really putting a shift in to deliver the best for local people, and hopefully the political judgments that we're taking tonight will stand the citizens of Oxford in good stead. So I hope people do rally around our budget proposals.
Right, now we have to do a recorded vote. And Jennifer will remind councillors how they express their preferences. Jennifer.
Lord Mayor, I'm going to stand up to do this one. I'm going to read out, this is the annual roll call, where I need to take a recorded vote. You have three options: for, against and abstain. I will start with the Lord Mayor and the Sheriff and then go alphabetically down the list of councillors. And if you could, when your name's called, say clearly whichever option for, against or abstain you are voting for. So, Lord Mayor?
Abstain.
Councillor Altaf Khan?
Against.
Councillor Abbasi? Councillor Azad? Councillor Brandt?
Abstain.
Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Chapman?
For.
Councillor Clarkson?
For.
Councillor Cook?
For.
Councillor Gant?
Abstain.
Councillor Goddard?
Abstain.
Councillor Gough?
Abstain.
Councillor Haynes?
Against.
Councillor Hayes?
For.
Councillor Henwood?
For.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
For.
Councillor Humberston?
For.
Councillor Illy Williamson?
For.
Councillor Kennedy? Councillor Ladbroke?
For.
Councillor Randall Mills isn't here. Councillor Lloyd Shebegson?
For.
Councillor Ligo?
For.
Councillor Munkongi?
For.
Councillor Paul? Councillor Cressel? Councillor Price?
For.
Councillor Rowley?
For.
Councillor Sanders? Councillor Simmons?
Abstain.
Councillor Sinclair? Councillor Smith? Councillor Tanner?
For.
Councillor Tarver?
For.
Councillor Taylor? Councillor Thomas?
Abstain.
Councillor Tidball? Councillor Turner? Councillor Upton? Councillor Wade? Councillor Wilkinson?
Abstain.
Councillor Wolfe?
Abstain.
And I don't think I've missed anyone, Lord Mayor.
Has anyone not had the chance to express their preference? No? I think you've done it, Dennis. Very well.
Would you like me to
Yes.
announce the
Get the results?
Yes. 29 for, 3 against and 9 abstentions.
Thank you. Now,
I'd like to move the recommendations in the report and we'll answer any questions.
thank you. Are there any questions for Councillor Turner? I would just point out that right down the bottom, Council asked to note the overall average bandy equivalent council tax of 1912.27, including parish precepts, and that includes the county and the Police and Crime Commission. Everyone has now decided how much they're going to be charging and what their budgets are going to be. Right, well, I'm afraid this has to be another recorded vote. I'm sorry about it, but I'm told the law requires, so we better be good. Right.
This is to agree the recommendations on council tax in your agenda pack. Lord Mayor?
I have to vote for it because we've set the budget.
Do you want a formal second? Do we have a formal seconder actually? For the council tax report. Sorry, Lord Mayor. We haven't had that.
Help. So, if we ask you very nicely, Councillor, would you say?
Yes, I would like to formally second the setting of the council tax.
Thank you very much.
Right.
I'm still going to vote for it. Yeah.
Councillor Altaf Khan.
For.
Councillor Abbasi. Councillor Azad. Councillor Brandt. Councillor Brown. Councillor Chapman. Councillor Clarkson. Councillor Cook. Councillor Gant. Councillor Goddard. Councillor Goff. Councillor Haynes.
4.
Councillor Hayes.
4.
Councillor Henwood. Councillor Hollingsworth. Councillor Humberston. Councillor Lily Williamson. Councillor Kennedy. Councillor Ladbroke. Councillor Lodge-Bexon. Councillor Ligo. Councillor Munkongi. Councillor Paul. Councillor Pressel. Councillor Price. Councillor Rowley. Councillor Sanders. Councillor Simmons. Councillor Sinclair. Councillor Smith. Councillor Tanner. Councillor Tarver. Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thomas. Councillor Tidball. Councillor Turner. Councillor Upton. Councillor Wade. Councillor Wilkinson. And Councillor Wolfe. It is not surprisingly unanimous in favour of setting the council tax as set out.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's a relief. The bills can now go out. What is it, next week? Not very welcome on people's doorsteps, I'm afraid. We now have Treasury Management Strategy, on which I'm quite sure that people would have questions. I think Councillor Turner is going to propose that we approve the strategy as described in on the order paper.
I'd like to move exactly that.
Thank you very much. Now, I do need a seconder. Remember at this time. Councillor Price. Okay, thank you. Now, any questions? I mean, Nigel is just longing to have some questions.
Well, I would just say that I know it's really boring and it comes at the end of a long meeting, but our Treasury Management Strategy is really very good, and I think we should be proud of the fact that over a few years we've become, we invest a lot in property, we get a lot of income from that, which means that it helps towards our services. We invest in housing through our affordable housing through our sort of Treasury Management Strategy. We invest in our companies through our Treasury Management Strategy, and it's an ethical strategy at that. So I think we should be very proud of it. So I just wanted to say that because it comes at the end of a long budget meeting and it's often forgotten that as far as other councils go, this is a very progressive Treasury Management Strategy.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. Right, I would just like to ask whether Council approves. Thank you. We don't have a recorded vote. No. But we should vote?
Yep.
Please, could everyone in favour please show?
I think that is everyone, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Now, then we have the annual update on the corporate plan, which I hope everybody has read and inwardly digested. Any comments on that? I think we're just noting it, but if anyone wishes to, I think Councillor Brown might want to introduce it very briefly.
Very briefly, I would just, we'll be relieved to hear you only have to note it, as you just said, Lord Mayor, and we had a very good discussion at Scrutiny and also good discussion at Executive Board, so bearing in mind the hour, I think we could just note it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. We note it. I think that it doesn't seem, it's only noting, so we don't need seconders. Thank you. I think we can now say thank you very much to everybody for, I think, a pretty good tempered and helpful debate. Number of points raised. Thank you very much. See you all soon.